Welcome back to the deep dive. You know how projects go? They start with all this enthusiasm and then, well, the inevitable happens.
Oh, yeah.
They run late, they run over budget, or, and this is my favorite, they do both of those things but still somehow manage to miss the entire point.
That is the perennial challenge, isn't it?
Huh?
And today, we are really undertaking a deep dive into the strategic core of how projects get delivered.
We are.
We're talking about the two dimensions that every single organization has to master: time and money.
Okay, and for our sources.
We're pulling from the latest principles in the PMBOK guide. Specifically, we're focusing on how the schedule performance domain and the finance performance domain have to be managed.
And not as separate things, right?
Not at all. Not as, separate administrative functions,
Yeah.
but as a single unified system.
So our mission today is to really unpack that strategic blueprint for you. This isn't just dry project management theory.
No, not at all.
This is more like the operating manual for organizations that, actually want to deliver on their promises.
And the sources, they immediately set the stage by defining these fundamental constraints.
Okay.
They're absolutely clear. This is a tightly interwoven system. The scope of the work, so what the project is actually set out to deliver, that directly dictates the schedule complexity.
Right.
But then you have the resources, your team, your budget, your equipment, and that is the practical constraint that determines the duration of any given activity.
So if you pull one of those levers, the other two just have to move.
They have to. If the scope is massive, the schedule expands.
And if the resources are limited?
The duration of the work lengthens.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Our sources basically confirm that the old way of thinking, managing the schedule in isolation from the money,
It's obsolete.
completely. The core philosophy of PMBOK 8 demands integration, not isolation.
So what's the new goal then?
The strategic goal is no longer just hitting some rigid deadline or spending exactly X dollars.
Yeah.
That's just, the administrative baseline. The real mission is maximizing value. And you do that through the flexible and integrated management of both time and cost.
And you have to understand that a decision in the schedule domain instantly becomes a constraint in the finance domain.
And vice versa. Absolutely.
So we really need to understand that shift. It's a move away from just controlling numbers to actually delivering optimal worth.
That's it. Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the constraint that I think generates the most stress for people: time. Time is so concrete, it's unforgiving, and it often seems to shrink the moment you start a project.
It does.
And the first concept our sources highlight, one that completely changes how we approach this, is progressive planning.
Progressive planning is really an acknowledgement of complexity and uncertainty.
Okay.
It's the mature recognition that you rarely, if ever, have 100% of the information on day one.
So trying to plan everything out is pointless.
Exactly. Insisting on defining every minute detail of a 2-year project right at the start isn't realism. It's an exercise in futility that just guarantees you'll have to rework everything later.
So instead of trying to predict the exact date for some task that's like 18 months away,
You focus intensely on the short-term future, and then you gradually detail the rest of the plan as you execute and learn more.
okay, so it's layered.
It is. The schedule's defined and refined in detail only as more information becomes available. For the immediate future, you have high clarity, high detail.
And for the long term?
For the midterm, you've got medium-level plans, and for the long term, you just maintain a high-level roadmap.
Now, this sounds incredibly appealing, especially in, today's volatile environments. But here's the critical question that always comes up. If progressive planning is so flexible, how do you stop stakeholders from constantly expanding the scope? How do you prevent that flexibility from just turning into chaos and scope creep?
And that's where the discipline of integration comes in. Progressive planning doesn't mean no planning.
Right.
It means layered planning. The flexibility is specifically designed to support adaptive environments, like agile projects, where the scope is actually intended to evolve based on feedback.
So the defense against scope creep isn't the fixed schedule itself?
No, it's the fixed duration and fixed resources of the short-term cycle, the sprint.
Ah, okay. So we commit to delivering something of value in the next 2 weeks with this team and this budget.
Exactly.
And if a stakeholder wants more, they have to wait for the next iteration, or we have to renegotiate priorities within this one.
Precisely. That fixed time box forces speed, responsiveness, and those crucial trade-off decisions that deliver timely value. The constraints just shift from rigidity to continuous, transparent negotiation. But even with that kind of planning, the work itself still has an inherent logical order.
Sure.
And ignoring that inherent logic is a guaranteed path to an unexecutable schedule. This is why dependencies are so foundational.
Right, the classic example. You can't put the roof on until the walls are up. But let's elaborate on the 3 types of dependencies our sources identify, because the nuances between them, that's where execution plans really tend to break down.
Let's start with the clearest one. Mandatory dependencies. These are things that must happen sequentially.
Because of physics or a contract?
Or just the intrinsic nature of the work. You can't launch the ad campaign until the creative assets are finalized and approved. There's really no negotiation there.
Okay, so that's mandatory. Then you have the ones that are negotiable, but probably shouldn't be.
Right. Discretionary dependencies. These are relationships that are preferred, usually based on best practices or maybe organizational history.
So like an internal rule.
Yeah. For instance, you could start testing a software module before the user documentation is finalized, but your organization's best practice might be to run them concurrently to catch errors early.
So a good planner sticks to those.
A good planner adheres to them because they represent an optimized, low-risk workflow. Ignoring them is risky, even if it's not impossible.
And the most volatile type, the one that derails otherwise perfect schedules.
External dependencies. These are completely outside the direct control of the project team.
Okay, give me an example.
A perfect one is a pharmaceutical company that needs to wait for FDA approval before they can move to clinical trials. Or an infrastructure project waiting for a critical utility relocation that's coordinated by the city government.
Let me offer a high-stakes scenario here.
Go for it.
Imagine a huge tech company launching a new phone. They plan their entire manufacturing and marketing schedule based on a specific microchip delivery date. If that chip delivery is an external dependency that's controlled by a stressed global supply chain, and they haven't factored in enough buffer time,
The entire multi-million-dollar launch collapses.
exactly, even if their internal development schedule was flawless.
That is the perfect illustration. Failing to track those external factors and, crucially, failing to communicate the risk associated with them to your stakeholders, that is a major source of project failure. A realistic schedule has to internalize those external realities.
And speaking of realism, let's talk about that universal human flaw, over-optimism.
Yes.
When people estimate time, they plan for the absolute best-case scenario. They ignore friction, illness, simple bad luck.
And that's the gap that PMBOK tries to close. Realistic estimation has to transition from guesswork to a data-driven discipline. You have to rely on historical data.
So how long did this exact type of task take last time with this specific team under similar constraints?
Yes. That immediately shifts the accountability. You can't just say, oh, I feel like it will take 3 days.
You have to justify it. We looked at the last 5 times we did this, and the average was 4.2 days, so we're estimating 5.
Exactly. Using past data reduces that subjective risk. And since no estimate is ever perfect, this data-driven approach leads us directly to the absolute necessity of having flexibility and reserves.
We've established that a schedule without reserves is just fragile.
It's brittle.
But let's distinguish between the types of reserves.
Okay, so we have 2 primary types. The first is the contingency reserve. This is time and money set aside for known risks. Risks we've identified, but we're not sure if they'll happen.
Like testing might take longer than planned.
Perfect example. So we reserve 3 extra days specifically for that risk. And that reserve is typically controlled by the project manager.
And the second type, the bigger picture one.
That would be the management reserve. This is time and money reserved for the unknown unknowns.
The things you just can't foresee.
Right. A sudden, unexpected regulatory change. A key supplier going bankrupt. This reserve is held by senior management, not the project manager, because using it fundamentally changes the project's baseline.
So a realistic, mature schedule has to include both.
Absolutely. Their absence signifies a plan that's built on hope, not reality.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's turn to the operational mechanics. Our sources define 5 core operations that bring this whole schedule domain to life.
But as we said, PMBOK is clear that these operations have to be flexible and customizable.
It's a crucial point.
And this is really important for you, the listener. You don't get points for just following the process. You get points for delivering value.
That's right.
So the processes are there to support timely delivery, not to create a bunch of administrative overhead.
Precisely. They're tools, not dogma.
And
they flow logically from defining the work all the way to tracking its execution.
Okay, so step 1, defining activities.
This is foundational. You're taking that high-level scope, the statement of work, and you're breaking it down into granular, measurable, and schedulable work elements.
If an activity isn't clearly defined, you can't estimate it.
You can't estimate its duration, and you certainly can't monitor its progress. Clarity here is the first defense against slippage.
Okay, step 2 builds the logical map. Sequencing activities.
Now you establish the flow. Which activities have to finish before others can start? Which ones can run in parallel? This involves using tools to identify those logical relationships, the mandatory, discretionary, and external dependencies we just covered, to build a workflow that's genuinely executable.
Then step 3, which relies heavily on that historical data we talked about, estimating durations.
Yep. Here you determine the time needed for each activity. And this estimation has to be grounded in realism. It has to account for the available resources.
How many people, their skill levels, the equipment they have.
All of it. If you estimate a 5-day duration, but you only assign a half-time resource, your schedule is already wrong. It requires marrying the logical task with the physical means of execution.
Then step 4 is the synthesis of all that, developing the schedule.
This is where the magic happens. We integrate the activities, their durations, the resources, all the dependencies into one integrated executable document.
And that could be a detailed Gantt chart or a series of sprint backlogs.
It doesn't matter what the format is, as long as it's the single source of truth for time delivery. And it has to be a living document. It's only valuable if it accurately reflects reality and gets updated as the project evolves.
And the 5th process makes sure that schedule doesn't just become an artifact gathering dust.
Monitoring the schedule. This is the real-time comparison of actual progress versus the plan. We track key milestones, identify schedule variances.
We're 3 days behind.
Exactly. And, critically, we support corrective actions based on those deviations. PMBOK is clear. Monitoring is linked directly to ensuring the schedule still supports the ultimate goal of value achievement.
So if the delays jeopardize the strategic objective, monitoring has to trigger some aggressive action.
It has to.
Let's focus on the human side again. We mentioned the danger of just imposing schedules on a team. When a manager forces an unrealistic deadline, say shaving 2 months off a timeline that the team estimated accurately, what's the inevitable result?
The sources highlight this vicious cycle. Forcing unrealistic schedules leads to immediate resistance, a lack of team commitment, and often you get this early-stage hidden padding.
What's that?
People quietly slowing down to meet the real estimate, not the arbitrary one management gave them. But more dangerously, it leads to team burnout and a significant decline in quality.
Which means more rework.
Which ironically destroys the schedule and increases the cost.
So the single biggest pitfall is ignoring the input from the people who are actually doing the work.
Without a doubt, the team must participate in estimation.
It's non-negotiable for success.
It is. It builds ownership and commitment. When the team co-creates the plan, they're committed to delivering on it. When a schedule is forced on them, they're only committed to proving management wrong. And this all leads to a higher level idea. We have to move beyond thinking of time merely as a constraint. We have to elevate it to a strategic factor. This brings us to the concept of strategic timing.
Okay, this sounds like efficiency, but with a market-oriented twist. This is where we define just-in-time delivery in a project context, right?
Exactly. JIT in delivery means arriving at the exact moment of maximum value realization. The organization literally builds the schedule around that optimal window.
Give me an example.
Think about a retailer launching its holiday promotions. Delivering the necessary IT system in November is optimal value.
Right on time.
Delivering it in July is too early. You have storage costs, risk of early obsolescence. Delivering it in January is too late.
Zero value. The season's over.
Zero value. So the schedule is no longer measured by its internal adherence, but by its alignment with external market demand.
That is a big strategic mindset shift.
It is, and it brings us to the profound nature of the timing value link. The sources are pretty dramatic about this. They say value is transient.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Give us a high-stakes example of that timing value link.
Okay, think about a highly regulated industry. A new privacy law comes into effect on January 1st. The project is to update all your systems to achieve compliance. If those systems go live on December 31st, the organization is compliant, the value is realized. You've avoided fines, maintained customer trust.
But if the project finishes on January 2nd,
the organization has already incurred fines, potential regulatory action, and reputational damage. The work might be technically perfect, but the value is destroyed because the window's strategic timing was missed by 48 hours.
Wow. That delay makes the work worthless.
It confirms that the schedule is truly linked to the organization's overall strategy and objectives. And this strategic link also dictates the scheduling approach you take.
Okay, so let's quickly recap those three environments and how time management adapts.
Sure. In a predictive waterfall environment where your scope is stable, the schedule is detailed, often months or even years out.
Control is strict. Deviation is costly.
Exactly. The value is realized at the very end, so that temporal discipline is enforced through adherence to the plan.
And the adaptive agile environment is the total opposite.
Right. Here, the schedule is short and flexible, focused on iterative value delivery every few weeks. The processes prioritize rapid feedback and speed of response. The schedule is detailed only for the immediate sprint.
And it prioritizes the next functional increment that delivers immediate tactical value.
That's it.
And the increasingly common hybrid approach.
That combines the strategic control of predictive with the execution flexibility of adaptive. You might have a detailed long-term schedule mapping major regulatory milestones,
Right.
which is predictive.
But underneath that,
The software team works on a 2-week iterative sprint schedule, which is adaptive. This requires extremely careful coordination and tailoring to make sure the short-term execution is always driving toward that long-term strategic timing objective.
okay, so time and money, they're two sides of the same coin. Let's shift our focus to the finance performance domain. And we're not talking about just counting pennies here.
No, we're talking about strategic investment.
Right.
So the first step in this domain is recognizing that finance is strategic, not just operational. It is the organization's investment strategy in action.
Okay.
Financial management provides the data needed to answer those high-level questions. Is this investment worthwhile? Should we allocate more capital here, or should we stop the project and allocate the funds somewhere else?
So if the project manager is only focused on keeping the current spending within budget, they're missing that strategic picture.
They are. They might be managing costs perfectly, while the project is just hemorrhaging future profit potential,
I see.
which is why the mindset has to shift to the value-oriented mindset. PMBOK insists that the fundamental question is, what value was achieved for the money spent?
So it's not just about the cost, it's about the return.
Right. Spending $1 million to create a fantastic product when the market was willing to pay $10 million for it, that's a successful project.
Okay.
Spending $500,000 on budget to create a product nobody needs, that's a financial failure.
So a project can be on budget but still fail financially if the expected return on investment, the ROI, isn't realized.
Exactly. Cost control is merely a tool for value maximization.
And to really maximize that ROI, we have to adopt the total cost perspective.
Yes, and this is often a huge challenge for organizations where project costs are siloed away from operational budgets.
So we need to look beyond just the direct costs of execution, like contractor fees and raw materials. What does the total cost perspective mandate we include?
It mandates looking at the entire project life cycle cost.
Okay, break that down.
It means incorporating future operational costs, maintenance, disposal, long-term support. Think about a cloud migration. A project might choose a quick, low-cost solution today, low execution cost. But if that solution requires specialized, high-cost engineering staff and generates exorbitant cloud consumption fees for the next decade,
High operational costs.
then the project was a financial disaster from a total cost perspective. It reframes the decision entirely.
It forces the project team to collaborate with the operations and finance teams to make sustainable, long-term decisions.
The total cost perspective is the bridge between project success and the organization's financial health. And finally, the budget itself serves a higher purpose. It acts as a governance and accountability tool. The budget is the mechanism by which the organization controls spending authority and aligns its resource allocation with its strategic goals.
So it provides transparency?
Transparency, yes. It lets stakeholders see where the investment is going, and it holds the project manager accountable to a specific baseline. Any significant deviation has to be formally reviewed and approved, which reinforces that organizational discipline and control.
Okay, let's dive into the core financial processes that translate that strategy into action. It all has to begin with robust financial planning and estimation.
Planning sets the stage. It's about identifying the overall budget ceiling, securing the necessary funding, and making sure every single spending category is tied directly to a deliverable that produces value.
But the quality of that plan rests entirely on the quality of the cost estimate.
It does. And our sources stress the need to use multiple methods for estimation to ensure that decision quality.
Okay, let's break down the three primary estimation techniques. analogous, parametric, and bottom-up.
We can think of them as moving from high-level guesswork to high-level certainty. Analogous estimating is the fastest and least certain.
Okay.
It involves using historical data from a similar, previously executed project to estimate the current one. If the last warehouse we built took $5 million, we estimate this similar one will also take $5 million.
Best used in the early stages when you don't have much information.
Exactly. It's fast, cheap, but only accurate if the projects are genuinely similar.
Okay, next is parametric estimating.
This is more statistically driven. It uses a mathematical relationship between historical data and project parameters.
How does that work?
If we know it costs $500 to paint 1 square meter, and our new project has 10,000 square meters.
You parametrically estimate $5 million for painting.
Exactly.
No.
It requires high-quality, measurable historical data, and it's highly effective for tasks with repetitive, quantifiable units.
So parametric is a step up, more accurate than analogous because it scales based on size, not just vague similarity.
That's a great way to put it.
And finally, the most accurate but also the most resource-intensive method, bottom-up estimating.
This is the gold standard for certainty. The project team estimates the cost of every single granular work package, labor, materials, duration, and then aggregates those estimates upward to arrive at the total cost.
It provides the highest quality decision-making information.
It does. And it's crucial for securing fixed-price contracts, but it demands significant time and resources to develop.
So when would a manager choose parametric over bottom-up?
Well, if a project is massive and time-pressured, a manager might use parametric for the large, predictable components, like a concrete foundation where costs per cubic meter are stable.
And then use bottom-up for the tricky parts.
And only use bottom-up for the high-risk or customized components, like a bespoke software integration. It's about smart tailoring and balancing the cost of the estimate against the risk of the project.
Makes sense.
So once we have the budget, we have to manage the flow of funds. Cash flow management is critically important, but it's often overlooked by technical managers who see it as purely an accounting function.
So why does cash flow management kill projects?
Because it ensures that liquidity is available at the right time. Imagine a massive construction project that needs a specialized crane. It costs $2 million, scheduled for delivery in March.
Okay.
If the finance department only releases that $2 million in April, the site just sits idle for a month. That delay stalls the schedule, frustrates the team, and destroys value by pushing the final delivery date past that optimal timing window.
So careful scheduling of payments and collections is a strategic imperative.
It is. It prevents work stoppage.
And this inherent uncertainty leads us to a really key strategic flexibility tool for modern projects, the incremental funding model.
This model is absolutely essential for managing financial risk, particularly in those adaptive environments where requirements are always evolving.
So instead of a big single upfront capital commitment,
the organization funds the project in short phases or increments.
That sounds like a strategic pressure mechanism. You only get the money for the next phase if you prove the last phase delivered value.
That's precisely what it is. Funding is tied directly to validated value delivery. This structure enforces continuous accountability and ensures that if the strategic value of the project diminishes midway through,
for example, a competitor launches a similar product,
right, then the organization can stop the funding with minimal waste in capital. It increases financial responsiveness and significantly reduces the risk of funding a valueless initiative for years.
So how do we know if all this planning and flexibility is actually working? We need metrics. This brings us to financial performance analysis and specifically earned value management, or EVM. Now, this is a critical technical concept, and we need to make it conceptually clear for everyone.
Okay. EVM is really the gold standard for integrated performance measurement because it simultaneously tracks scope, schedule, and cost. It answers the one big question: how much value have we received for the money we have spent and the time we have consumed?
Let's break down the 3 core components of EVM using a simple analogy. Let's say we're building a house.
Perfect. First, you have planned value, or PV. This is simply the authorized budget for the work that is scheduled to be completed up to a specific date.
So if by the end of March, we plan to have $100,000 worth of foundation work complete, then $100K is our PV.
Exactly. Second, you have actual cost, AC.
That one's easy.
It's the total cost incurred in accomplishing the work that has been completed up to that same date. If you actually spent $120,000 on the foundation by the end of March, $120K is your AC.
And the third piece, the real innovation of EVM. Earned value, or EV.
EV is the value of the work actually completed, expressed in terms of the planned budget. So if you only completed 80% of the planned foundation work by the end of March, even though you spent 120 grand.
Your earned value is only 80% of the planned budget.
Right. So it's $80,000.
So using those three numbers, PV at 100K, AC at 120K, and EV at 80K a week, can instantly calculate our variances.
We can. We calculate the cost variance, which is EV minus AC. In this case, 80K minus 120K, which is a negative 40,000.
We're over budget.
And we calculate the schedule variance, which is EV minus PV. That's 80K minus 100K, a negative 20,000.
We're behind schedule.
EVM provides an immediate, objective snapshot of your resource efficiency and schedule health. It supports those crucial go-no-go decisions about whether the current spending rate is even sustainable.
That is robust. And I assume the financial processes also have to include rigorous change management.
Oh, absolutely. If the scope changes or if EVM reveals massive variances, the financial plan has to adapt.
So you need a formal process.
A formal process for managing financial changes is non-negotiable. Every single change, whether it's driven by scope, schedule acceleration, or quality demands, must undergo a financial impact analysis before it's approved. This prevents unauthorized cost creep and ensures that the budget remains an accurate governance tool.
We've established that time and money are these fluid, integrated systems, all geared toward maximizing value. But if we try to apply, say, a 10-step financial approval process to a 2-week adaptive sprint, we completely destroy our own flexibility.
You do.
Which brings us to the strategic necessity of tailoring.
Tailoring is the explicit instruction from PMBOK 8 to reject rigidity.
One size fits none.
Exactly. It means adapting our financial and scheduling methods to the project's unique fingerprint, its size, its complexity, the organizational culture, and its risk profile. The goal is efficiency, getting the necessary discipline without creating unnecessary bureaucracy.
So what are the key factors a manager needs to assess when they're deciding how to customize their management approach?
We have 4 crucial factors. First one is scope clarity.
Okay.
If the scope is crystal clear and stable, say building a bridge or a certified medical device, we can and should use highly detailed, long-term predictive schedules and fixed definitive budgets.
But if the scope is volatile, like a new AI solution,
then we must mandate progressive planning and use the incremental funding model. Ambiguity in the scope demands maximum flexibility in both time and cost controls.
Factor 2, the development approach itself.
As we've noted, predictive needs rigorous, formalized cost control and early detailed estimation to enforce that temporal discipline. Adaptive needs rapid decision-making authority for financial matters and continuous short-cycle review of the ROI.
So you have to align the control mechanisms with the speed of the work. If your schedule is adaptive, your financial approvals have to be adaptive too.
They must. Factor 3, organizational context and governance.
This is about regulation and internal compliance.
Right. Projects subject to strict external regulation, like defense contracts or public works, require high documentation, formalized cost tracking, and multi-layered approvals for schedules and budgets.
But on the flip side,
An internal, low-risk innovation project should use lighter processes to accelerate speed and reduce administrative drag. Tailoring has to prioritize compliance where it's required, but shed unnecessary overhead everywhere else.
and factor 4, risk and uncertainty.
This determines the size and type of reserves you'll need. High-risk projects, whether that's due to technical complexity or external market factors, they require substantially greater time and financial contingency reserves.
And tailoring here means defining the rules around how and when those reserves can be used.
Exactly. Making sure they are a calculated risk buffer, not just an informal slush fund. The whole goal of this smart tailoring is simple. Find the sweet spot.
That balance.
The balance between the absolute minimum control you need for governance and accountability and the maximum flexibility you need for rapid adaptation and value creation.
And the moment you tailor the schedule, you have to tailor the finance domain because they're so intrinsically linked.
They are.
Let's map out those critical cross-domain interactions.
The schedule finance link is the most direct. A decision to compress the schedule, say, by hiring 3 new contractors to accelerate a critical task, that is an immediate financial outlay.
And conversely, a financial decision to cut the budget.
It forces the schedule to stretch out, or it compels the team to reduce scope. It's a constant trade-off analysis.
And the foundational connection to scope is still paramount.
Scope instability is the single biggest threat to this whole integrated system. An unclear scope makes duration estimation impossible and budgeting pure guesswork.
So when the scope changes,
The project manager has to trigger a formal process that analyzes the impact across both the schedule, so resequencing, duration changes, and the budget cost increases, reserve deployment. They rise and fall together.
okay, now, the team and schedule finance connection. We talked about team input, but let's talk about resource strain.
Unrealistic schedules place unsustainable demands on the team. And this doesn't just reduce quality, it impacts long-term financial health. High resource utilization rates, pushing the team to 100% capacity for months on end, that leads to attrition.
Which requires costly replacement and retraining.
And it also increases the risk of mistakes that require expensive rework.
So scheduling adequate buffer time for a team to recover, learn, and do quality assurance is actually a strategic financial decision. It prevents greater costs down the line.
Absolutely. Scheduling for sustainability is a long-term cost-saving measure. And finally, we need to look at uncertainty and risk. We use reserves to manage them, but how does this management cross the domains?
Well, the sources make it clear that uncertainty management needs resources from both domains.
It does. If a major supplier delay occurs, that's a risk event. The project needs time reserved to absorb the delay and prevent the final milestone from slipping.
But at the same time,
It needs financial reserve to potentially charter an expensive rush delivery flight or pay overtime to the internal team to catch up later. The reserves act as integrated shock absorbers.
and if you only have one reserve, say, only time, but no money to deploy extra resources.
Your ability to recover is severely limited.
Let's end the core discussion by distinguishing between simple monitoring and strategic evaluation. We monitor daily to see if we hit today's targets.
Right.
But we have to periodically check results.
Check results is that periodic moment of stepping back to ask the ultimate question. Is this project still strategically viable? It's a formalized, high-level evaluation that confirms that your time performance aligns with the accepted schedule and, critically,
It confirms that the current timing supports the timely achievement of the intended value.
that's the key part.
So we're not just comparing actual dates to planned dates. What's the scope of this strategic evaluation?
We evaluate three things. First, the ongoing realism of the current schedule. Are the dependencies still valid? Is the team still capable of achieving the remaining estimates? Second, we assess the impact of time performance on the expected benefits. If we discover that a 6-week delay means we're going to miss a new government incentive program, which was the core benefit of the project.
Then the project framework is failing, even if we're only slightly behind schedule internally.
Exactly. Which brings us squarely back to the ultimate value question. The schedule is only good if it serves the strategic objective.
Right.
If the project is scheduled to deliver a system upgrade in Q4, but leadership has pivoted the company's strategy to focus on a completely different platform by Q3, the check results exercise reveals that the Q4 deadline, even if achieved perfectly, will result in zero value. The timing is irrelevant to the new strategic reality.
So this high-level check supports aggressive action.
It has to. Check results forces data-based corrective action. It's the trigger for a major modification. Based on this strategic assessment, we decide whether to continue, modify the plan to meet the new strategic timing, which might require aggressive schedule compression and significant financial outlay, or potentially terminate the project entirely before sinking more capital into a valueless endeavor.
It prevents the organization from successfully executing a doomed plan.
That's it. So, to synthesize our deep dive today, the PMBOK philosophy is really a mandate for integration. The schedule and finance domains are inseparable. They operate as a single, dynamic system that's focused on maximizing value, not just minimizing variance. Success today relies on strategic timing, on transparency, and on a system of shared responsibility across the entire organization.
So the maturity of an organization is reflected in its ability to manage time flexibly and deploy financial resources strategically. By applying techniques like progressive planning, robust EVM, and smart tailoring, you enable smart, data-driven decisions that dramatically increase the project's probability of success.
And ensure that every dollar and every hour spent prioritizes value delivery above all else.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. If late delivery can lose all its intended value, even if the work is technically perfect, how much financial reserve is justifiable to protect the integrity of that delivery timeline? For example, accelerating tasks at great cost. And crucially, at what point does accumulating too much time in financial reserve itself, the cost of holding that money in buffer time, become a financial drain that actually reduces the project's overall value proposition?
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we turn massive amounts of technical documentation into focused, actionable knowledge just for you.
And today, we are really embarking on a crucial journey. We're going through the philosophy shifts that are defining modern project success. And we're drawing this directly from key excerpts of the PMBOK Guide, 8th edition. This material, it's really the most contemporary roadmap out there for managing complex initiatives.
That's absolutely right. And you've given us a fantastic stack of sources here. They're really zeroing in on 3 massive performance domains: finance, stakeholders, and resources. Now, if you studied project management, say, 10 or 15 years ago, success was, well, it was usually narrowly defined by that triple constraint, right?
Route, time, cost.
Yeah, exactly. You had 3 separate silos, and if you nailed those 3, you earned your success medal.
But PMBOK 8 fundamentally rejects that view. That siloed thinking is out. The core idea, and I think this is the mission statement for you listening to this deep dive, is to really show you how modern management demands these 3 areas work together.
As a single system.
A single seamless system. And it's all focused on delivering value. It's about continuous adaptation and maximizing that integrated value for all parties involved, not just, checking 3 separate boxes.
And I think if you can internalize this integrated view, you won't just manage a project. You'll actually lead it strategically. You'll have the precise language and the concepts you need to drive meaningful value in any modern organization.
So let's jump right in. Where do we start?
With the domain that touches everything, the universal translator for consequences, .money.
Absolutely. Let's do it. So the financial performance domain, it's detailed in section 2.4 of the material you sent over, and it's really the central nervous system of the project. The first principle PMBOK establishes is that these performance domains are not independent units. They're not silos. And the financial domain is maybe the most entangled of all, because every single decision, every modification made in the project, it instantly reflects
Financially.
Of course.
Financially.
That just makes incredible sense, doesn't it? If I choose a cheaper material, that's a financial choice, but it has quality consequences, risk consequences. Or if I add a complex feature that a customer asks for, boom, that's a financial impact that immediately affects the timeline. Money is just the measure of the trade-off.
Exactly. And the inverse is also true. Any financial decision you make.
Right.
Let's say you decide to increase contingency reserves or delay a capital expenditure or implement some cost-saving measure that has immediate direct implications across the entire project. This domain, it provides the quantitative basis for measuring risk and assessing returns.
Okay, so if it's the nervous system, we can't let it become this bureaucratic nightmare, right? How does PMBOK 8 define effective financial management? Because it sounds like we should be striving for smart, appropriate finance, not just, complicated accounting. That's the key strategic insight right there. Effective financial management is defined as being the most appropriate for the context, not the most cumbersome, not the most rigid. Proper financial detailing is, in essence, the modern project manager's secret weapon. It's not just bookkeeping.
No.
It's a strategic tool. It's designed to reduce waste, enhance governance, and root every single decision in maximizing that integrated value.
So what are the strategic success indicators then? For you listening, what should you look for to know if your financial detailing is actually working? What does good look like?
The material we reviewed lays out 5 non-negotiables. When this domain is managed correctly, you should be able to see these 5 things very clearly. First, clear procedures. Everyone on the project knows how money is budgeted, tracked, and approved. No ambiguity.
Okay, that's foundational.
Second, sufficient flexibility. The financial framework has to be adaptable enough to handle the inevitable changes without just collapsing.
It bends, it doesn't break.
Precisely. Third, a commitment to governance. There have to be clear financial policies and controls that are, and this is the key, actively enforced.
Like not just sitting in a binder on a shelf.
Fourth, and this is a big one, a clear link to value. Any expenditure must be visibly and demonstrably connected to the value being delivered. You should be able to ask, why are we spending this, and get a clear answer about value.
And the 5th.
Fast financial decision-making. Decisions about funding or changes or expenditures are made quickly to avoid organizational inertia.
I think that 5th point is a massive departure from old school project management. A huge one. If I have to wait 3 weeks for some outdated committee to approve a $10,000 necessary change, the project burns $20,000 in lost time and stalled work while I wait.
Exactly.
So the speed of decision-making is a financial performance metric now.
It absolutely is. And that speed, as you just pointed out, it directly links back to the 3rd point, governance. The correct detailing supports the quick analysis you need for that fast decision-making. When you have high-quality, real-time financial data, governance is enhanced because you can make disciplined choices that support value rather than simply reacting to invoices months later.
Okay, let's make this integration concrete. Since finance is so entangled, let's explore how it interacts with the entire project ecosystem. But I don't want to just list them off. Let's think about a real-world scenario. Let's say we've just seen a significant budget overrun in the last period. Where in the project ecosystem are the first three places that money trail is likely leading us?
That's a great way to approach it, a fantastic way. Because financial symptoms, they often point directly to problems in other performance domains. A budget overrun almost always starts with scope, schedule, or quality, the classic triangle.
Okay, let's start with scope.
Any deviation, any addition, or any change in scope, what we all call scope creep. It has a direct financial cost. You have new requirements or you have to modify existing ones. The financial domain is the gatekeeper here. It provides the cold, hard data necessary for decision makers to determine whether they can or, whether they should accept or reject a proposed scope change.
But wait, isn't there a risk there? That by making financial data the ultimate reality check, we end up prioritizing the cheapest scope over the most valuable scope. How do we prevent that kind of short-term thinking?
That's a critical probe, and it really highlights why PMBOK 8 focuses so much on integrated value. It's not just about cost. The financial domain doesn't just present the cost, it presents the cost of delay or the return on investment associated with that scope element. So if the new feature costs $100,000 but it unlocks $5 million in market share, that's the value, the financial domain absolutely supports the decision to accept it. But conversely, controlling scope is clearly defined as a primary tool for controlling costs. If your requirements management is weak, your budget will just hemorrhage. It's that simple.
Okay, that's a clear link.
Yeah.
Now, moving to schedule. Let's say we have a mandated market release date that we absolutely cannot miss. Our schedule is suddenly too long. How does the financial domain support our acceleration options?
Well, the old adage, time is money, is never more true than here. Delays don't just push back when you start making money. They always lead to increased operational costs and resource depletion.
You're burning cash, just keeping the lights on.
Exactly. So to hit that mandatory deadline, the financial domain supports these specialized schedule acceleration analyses, primarily around two techniques, crashing and fast-tracking.
Crashing and fast-tracking. These get thrown around interchangeably sometimes, but they represent very different financial choices, don't they?
They do, and the financial domain makes that distinction crystal clear. Crashing means adding resources, often expensive resources, to critical path activities to shorten their duration. The financial domain calculates the exact cost of crashing versus the benefit of the shortened timeline. It's expensive, but it's often lower risk.
And fast-tracking.
Fast-tracking means you're changing the sequence of work. You're overlapping phases that would normally be sequential to save time.
So doing things in parallel that you'd normally do one after the other.
Right. And while that's cheaper up front, the financial domain has to analyze the potential cost of the resulting rework, the increased risk, and the resource conflicts that might pop up later on. The data dictates whether the project can afford the cost of guaranteed acceleration, that's crashing, or the cost of potential rework, which is the risk with fast-tracking.
That is a sophisticated strategic decision supported entirely by finance. Okay, let's move to quality. I remember a story about a PM who, trying to save $500 on training for his fabrication team, ended up costing his organization $50,000 in rework and warranty claims later that quarter. How does finance enforce the lesson that cheap isn't always frugal?
The financial domain provides the framework for analyzing what's called the cost of quality, or QOQ. Quality inherently has costs, and the financial structure forces the project manager to balance three specific types of costs.
Got it.
First, you have prevention costs. That's investing upfront in training, planning, inspection. Second, you have failure costs. That's rework, waste, warranty claims, lost reputation.
The $50,000 in that story.
Exactly. And third, improvement costs.
So the analysis really shows that skimping on prevention costs just shifts that money directly into failure costs, which are almost always exponentially higher.
That is the core realization PMBOK 8 drives home. The integrated financial view explicitly states that cutting costs excessively degrades quality and leads to costly rework. It proves that high quality actually reduces long-term financial costs and supports sustained value. It encourages a smart, targeted investment strategy.
And what about risk? Risk management seems inherently financial.
It is. Risks almost always materialize as financial consequences. Financial planning directly supports risk mitigation in two critical ways. First, by estimating reserves, the contingency funds for known risks, and management reserves for the unknown risks. You can't budget for a risk response if you haven't financially detailed your reserves.
And the second way?
By creating robust financial response plans for threats.
And what's a fatal mistake here? The one that just guarantees an unexpected surprise down the line.
Ignoring the balance. It always comes back to balance. Financial decisions must always balance the calculated level of risk against the expected return. If you fail to factor the cost of risk mitigation and reserves into your financial plan, you are virtually guaranteeing that any materializing risk becomes a budget catastrophe. Transparency in risk costs is essential for accountability.
Got it. Now let's look at governance. If finance is what money is spent on, governance is sort of the rule book for how it should be spent.
The relationship is purely complementary. Governance sets the controls and financial policies. It dictates the boundaries. The financial domain, through its execution and real-time reporting, clarifies where and why the money was actually spent. It provides the necessary evidence base for that governance.
So governance creates the container, and finance fills it with data and transparency. What happens if they're disconnected?
Weak integration. That leads directly to financial excesses, loss of accountability, and sometimes even compliance failures. When the governing rules and the expenditure data are separated, the project loses financial control and risks failure. The financial reporting has to align directly with the governance structure to provide that auditable transparency.
And all that transparency is ultimately aimed at value delivery.
Absolutely. The financial domain is central to achieving value. Every expenditure must be justified by the value it ultimately delivers. Integrated planning ensures financial resources are directed where they achieve the highest quantifiable value for the organization or the customer. It serves as the ultimate check on whether the project is fulfilling its fundamental purpose.
Finally, let's touch on the development approach. So, predictive versus adaptive.
The financial approach has to completely adapt to the delivery method. You can't have a mismatch. Predictive or waterfall projects, they typically involve long-term, fixed-period funding against a detailed baseline.
Right. Big pot of money up front.
Pretty much. But adaptive or agile approaches, conversely, they rely on phased, value-based funding. They often review financing and refund after every iteration or cycle. The financial structure must dynamically match the pace of delivery and the level of uncertainty inherent in the approach. You just cannot use a rigid, predictive financial plan on a highly iterative, agile project. It will fail. So building on that concept of finance as the project's nervous system, we now move to the essential function of check results.
Okay.
This is the feedback loop that tells us if the system is not only operating, but operating healthily.
When I hear check results, my mind immediately goes to, like, a financial audit at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But you are telling us this is a continuous, integrated process.
It is so much more than an audit. The material stresses that check results is a continuous process, not a final step. It's focused on assessing if the project's financial practices are achieving the desired strategic goals. And critically, it's about verifying value achievement against expenditure. You are assessing the strategic return on investment while the investment is happening, not waiting until all the money is spent.
So this process ensures that financial resources are being used efficiently and that the budget is truly supporting the strategic objectives. Okay, so if I'm the one listening, what are the essential strategic questions check results must answer for me continuously?
There are 4 core strategic pillars for verification. 4 questions you should always be asking. First is the alignment check. Does the actual spending align with the meticulously defined financial plan? Are we on track?
Simple.
Second, the justification check. Does the achieved value justify the costs incurred to date? Are we getting enough value for the rate we are spending?
That's a harder question to answer.
It is, but it's crucial. Third, the viability check. Are future financial projections still realistic and sustainable based on our current performance? And finally, the continuation check. Is the project still financially justified for continuation, or should we stop, reorient, or terminate it early?
That fourth point, the ability to identify non-viable projects and stop them early, that is incredibly powerful, but it requires real institutional courage. Can you give us a sense of the potential impact here?
Of course. Consider a hypothetical major IT modernization project. It's 3 months in, it's cost $2 million so far, and the total budget is $20 million. Now, check results shows that due to an unforeseen market shift, the plan value of the final deliverable has dropped by 60%.
Wow.
If the project manager has high-quality data showing that the future ROI is now marginal or maybe even negative, the financial check supports a strategic decision for early termination. Even though $2 million was spent, stopping now saves $18 million in capital and frees up dozens of talented resources for other higher-value opportunities.
That's what the source material calls investment discipline. It's about being ruthless in prioritizing capital.
Precisely. It prevents organizations from continuing financially unviable projects purely out of inertia or, the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay, let's get practical about the analysis itself. What specific indicators are we looking at when we perform these continuous checks? What's the data?
We rely on several tangible indicators. We are continuously comparing planned versus actual costs, which feeds directly into variance analysis. We rigorously review cash flows to make sure liquidity is maintained and the timing is correct. We analyze any financial deviations, and then we initiate a root cause analysis to figure out why the variance occurred.
It's not enough to know you're over budget. You have to know why.
You have to. And we also assess resource utilization efficiency. Are we getting the most productivity out of the team and the equipment we're paying for?
And you mentioned a technical concept earlier, earned value. For listeners who don't live in EVM spreadsheets, what's the one-sentence takeaway? What does earned value tell us that simple cost tracking doesn't?
That's a great question. Simple cost tracking tells you how much money you spent.
Right.
Earned value, or EVM, objectively measures how much work you accomplished for that money. It allows us to determine, in financial terms, if we are ahead or behind schedule and over or under budget, all based on the physical progress we've actually made. It is the most objective measure of performance and progress, especially in environments where predictability is high.
That's a crucial distinction. Progress, not just expenditure. Okay, let's talk about timing. How does the context predictive versus adaptive shift the timing of these checks?
In traditional predictive environments, verification happens periodically at key milestones, which are often called stage gates. These formal checkpoints give senior stakeholders and governance bodies a structured moment to review the financial health data and decide whether to approve moving to the next phase.
And in Agile?
In adaptive or agile environments, this process is continuous and far more frequent. It often occurs after every single cycle or iteration.
Every 2 weeks, potentially.
Exactly. And that's because the financing model is intrinsically linked to the incremental value that was realized in that cycle, so it demands immediate financial verification.
So the mechanism changes dramatically, but the goal stays the same: early modification.
Exactly. The goal is never to wait until the end. We want to enable early modification, whether that's adjusting the scope, reorienting the strategy, or confirming early termination, while corrective action is still financially viable and minimally disruptive.
You linked this feedback loop back to governance earlier. Can you expand on how check results fundamentally reinforces financial governance?
Well, this continuous feedback loop is a foundational mechanism for strong financial governance. It supports accountability and ensures compliance because it provides objective, data-driven evidence on every expenditure. It ensures that every financial decision aligns with institutional policies and regulatory requirements. When key financial stakeholders participate in reviewing these results, it establishes radical transparency, and that builds the organizational trust that is essential for smooth and rapid high-level decision-making.
So the strategic summary of the financial domain is clear then. Success in PMBOK is defined not just by adhering to a budget, but by achieving sustainable, verifying value through financial discipline.
Consciously spent money, objectively measured value, and a continuous feedback loop that ensures financial health. That is the modern mandate.
We've established that money is the universal language of project consequence. Now, let's move to the people who authorize, fund, use, or even resist the project. The stakeholders' performance domain.
This domain, which is covered in Section 2.5, is absolutely crucial, and PMBOK 8 introduces a huge philosophical shift here. Stakeholders, and that's everyone from sponsors and customers to the team, regulators, external vendors, they are defined as central partners in achieving value. They're not just entities to be informed passively.
So it's a move beyond a simple mailing list. It's realizing that every single one of these people or groups holds a piece of the project's potential value, or conversely, a piece of its potential downfall.
That's spot on. The ultimate success metric for this domain is directly tied to the satisfaction of key stakeholders with the achieved results. Think about it. If you delivered the product perfectly on time and on budget, but your customer base or a regulatory body rejects it, the project fails to deliver value. Period.
And this environment is dynamic. People don't stand still. Their influence shifts. Their interests wax and wane. Their support can flip to resistance overnight.
That dynamic environment is the reality we have to manage. The sources insist on the continuous review of the stakeholder map. Their influence, their interests, their position, whether it's support or resistance, it's not fixed. We have to adapt our strategy continuously to match their current state.
This brings us to a really crucial distinction that separates modern management: engagement versus communication. A lot of people still confuse the two.
They do. The modern concept moves aggressively beyond passive communication. Passive communication is, sending reports, status updates, broadcasts. The focus now is on active engagement. And engagement means proactively involving stakeholders in decision-making, requiring them to evaluate intermediate results, and creating channels for continuous constructive feedback.
Why is that active involvement, that higher bar of engagement, so vital, especially in complex projects?
Effective deep engagement is the direct path to two organizational goods: reducing resistance and increasing necessary support. When stakeholders feel heard and integrated and respected as partners, their expectations are managed preemptively, and they become powerful advocates for the final outcome. It creates a sense of ownership.
Managing the variables is where the strategic project manager really earns their keep, isn't it? We have to deal with power, influence, and managing what can often be wildly disparate expectations.
That's right. Not all stakeholders are equal, and you can't treat them that way. The analysis requires understanding their level of influence and their level of interest to intelligently prioritize your effort and design appropriate interaction strategies.
So a stakeholder with high power and high interest.
They demand hands-on management and frequent participation, whereas a stakeholder with low power and low interest might only require periodic email updates. The goal is maximum impact with minimal wasted effort.
And we keep coming back to expectations. Unclear expectations are project killers.
Absolutely. Unclear or misaligned expectations are cited in the sources as a primary cause of project failure. The management in this domain is laser-focused on clarifying two things: what can be achieved realistically and what is definitively out of scope. Systematically managing that gap between expectation and reality is essential for reducing destructive conflict and building lasting trust.
So stakeholders are either a source of risk or a source of opportunity.
They are inherently both. Some stakeholders inherently pose organizational or social risks through outright resistance or conflicting demands or political maneuvering. Others represent huge opportunities. They might offer specialized expertise or essential funding or critical political support. Understanding their position helps you actively mitigate the negative risks, like resistance, and leverage the positive support. To manage this dynamic complexity, PMBOK 8 outlines a set of flexible, guiding processes. And it's crucial to remember these are not rigid steps. They're strategic concepts that have to be tailored to the project context, the organizational environment, and the complexity.
Okay, let's walk through that life cycle, starting with the baseline. Identify stakeholders.
This means recognizing all internal and external parties who can affect or be affected by the project. And this is broad. It includes the obvious people, like the customer, and the less obvious, like the future maintenance team or the compliance auditor. And the key principle here is that this is not a one-time activity. The list has to be updated continually because people move, roles change, new regulatory bodies might become involved.
Once they're identified, we move to analyze stakeholders. This is the strategic triage.
Yes. You have to determine their power, their formal authority, their interest, how invested they are in the project outcome, and their position, where they stand: supportive, neutral, or resistant. Tools like the power interest matrix or influence maps can guide your strategy, and they ensure you allocate maximum effort to the most consequential stakeholders.
Then we decide what to do with that information in planned stakeholder engagement. How does this planning step ensure we are focused on active participation?
Well, planning engagement requires determining the appropriate interaction method and the required level of participation for each group. The plan shifts the manager from being a reporter to being an orchestrator. You decide the cadence and the format. For some, it might be a formal monthly steering committee. For others, it's a quick co-creation workshop. The goal is to maximize active involvement where it matters most, not just passive reporting.
Once the plan is set, we move to the continuous execution phase, manage stakeholder engagement.
This is the operational engine of the domain. It is the continuous work of building trust, addressing concerns immediately, running all the planned interaction events, and managing the overall relationship portfolio. The source material really emphasizes that this activity lasts the entire project lifecycle. It is the daily work of strategic relationship management.
Next, let's discuss communication. We've established that it's a component of engagement, but it has to be targeted.
Absolutely. Communication means transferring the right information at the right time in the right way, tailored specifically to the audience's needs and their technical capacity. It must be clear, honest, and targeted.
So you wouldn't explain financial burn rate to a non-technical end-user group the same way you would to a CFO.
Exactly. And poor communication is one of the leading documented causes of project failure. It generates misunderstanding, it erodes trust, and it fuels conflicting expectations.
And there are two processes that focus specifically on closing the gap: manage expectations and manage resistance.
Managing expectations is proactive damage control. It involves explicitly communicating the project's limitations and realities. You address any gaps between what stakeholders hope for and the feasible scope to prevent disappointment and conflict later.
And managing resistance.
This is perhaps the trickiest part. The process involves identifying the root cause of the opposition. Is it fear of change? A loss of power? A simple lack of understanding? Then you address it through dialogue, participation, and, where possible, incorporating their concerns. The strategic aim is to convert resistance into support, or, failing that, at least minimize its negative impact on the project timeline and morale.
And finally, the strategic feedback loop for the people domain. Monitor engagement.
Just like we monitored finance, we can't just execute the activities and assume success. Monitoring requires regularly assessing the effectiveness of our engagement. Are people satisfied with the process? Are they participating at the level we planned? Are we effectively communicating the right messages? You use these results to take corrective action, to adjust your approach, and ensure your relationship strategies are actually working to build support.
That brings us perfectly to the adaptive mindset required for modern project management. The processes are flexible, but how do we apply them correctly? We need to talk about tailoring the approach. Hashtag TAG 4.1, tailoring the approach. One size does not fit all.
Tailoring is fundamental in the PMBOK 8 philosophy. It means selecting, modifying, and custom building your stakeholder management practices, the specific tools, methods, and communication styles to fit the project's specific nature, its environment, the stakeholder characteristics, and the level of uncertainty.
So no templates.
The rule is clear. Rigid adherence to a template guarantees misalignment.
So we're not just pulling a plan off the shelf, we're custom building the relationship strategy. What are the key factors that drive this customization?
The first and most obvious is stakeholder characteristics. Their sheer number. Are they 5 key people or 5,000 global end users? Their influence, their cultural diversity, and their existing resistance level. All of that has to determine your communication frequency and engagement style.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Managing culturally diverse stakeholders might require translating materials or using more visual aids or ensuring representation from different regional groups in key decision meetings.
And the development approach itself is a major factor. Agile projects demand a fundamentally different style of stakeholder interaction than predictive projects do.
That is a massive tailoring point. Agile inherently requires continuous, direct, and frequent participation, making the stakeholder, often the product owner, a true embedded partner who accepts deliverables constantly. Predictive approaches, on the other hand, rely on defined, scheduled communication points, formal reports, and maybe only one major acceptance sign-off at the very end.
So your plan has to mirror your delivery cadence.
Exactly. You can't ask a busy executive to attend daily stand-ups, but you must ensure they are available for the quarterly stage gate review in a predictive model.
And what about complexity and risk, when the path forward is murky?
That relates to complexity and uncertainty. High-risk, highly innovative, or highly complex projects require a significantly increased communication frequency, and they require the early involvement of stakeholders in high-space decision-making. The transparency provided by over-communicating helps reduce anxiety and build trust when the project is charting unknown waters.
And if it's a simple, routine project?
If a project is low-risk and routine, you can tailor down the communication frequency.
Can you give us a practical example of tailoring an action that shows this adaptive mindset?
Think about a large infrastructure project. The regulatory bodies are high-power, high-interest stakeholders, but their interaction must be formal and scheduled. The internal operations team is high-interest, medium-power, and they need hands-on involvement through workshops. The general public is low-power, medium-interest, but requires simple, visual, and highly transparent updates through a dedicated website or a town hall. The tailoring here means you have three vastly different engagement strategies running concurrently.
Another quick example.
Sure. In Agile projects, you might reduce the 50-page formal status reports in favor of quick 15-minute dashboard reviews that are designed for speed and clarity. #tag 4.2 stakeholder interconnections and check results. This entire deep dive is about integration, so we need to see how stakeholder management connects to the other essential domains.
Okay, let's start with the internal structure. Integration with team.
Strong internal team cohesion is the foundation for effective external relationships. When team roles are clearly defined and the internal dynamics are healthy, it reduces confusion and it increases confidence for your external stakeholders. Conversely, internal conflicts, silos, turf wars, unclear decision rights, they almost always spill over and negatively affect external stakeholders. It causes them to lose trust and withdraw support.
So leadership's ability to foster internal collaboration directly impacts external relationship quality.
Directly.
And integration with planning. This is where the requirements meet the reality of the schedule and the budget.
Yes, the requirements you capture from stakeholders fundamentally shape the project's scope, schedule, and budget. Stakeholders are the source of truth for value definition. A non-inclusive planning process, one that fails to engage the right stakeholders early in defining scope, is highly likely to result in ultimate project failure because the output will not meet the agreed-upon needs.
And the link back to uncertainty risk.
Stakeholders are a primary source of both organizational risks resistance, political battles, and strategic opportunities like support and funding. In high uncertainty environments, transparency and continuous dialogue are essential tools for reducing stakeholder anxiety and managing latent resistance. Poor management in these settings guarantees that social or organizational issues become major project risks.
Let's wrap up this domain by discussing the stakeholder check results. If we're actively engaging them, how do we know our efforts are actually translating into strategic success?
The check results here is a strategic intelligence tool. It assesses whether your engagement efforts are successful compared to what you planned. It moves beyond merely checking off activities. Did we have the meeting? To checking the strategic results, did the meeting effectively build consensus and accelerate decision-making?
So what are we measuring in this strategic assessment?
We measure several key indicators. First, level of participation. Are the right people showing up, and are they actively contributing at the level we planned? Second, stakeholder satisfaction. Are they satisfied with the communication frequency, the transparency of the process, and the speed of our response time?
Important.
Third, effectiveness of communication. Is the message clear and timely? Are key stakeholders consistently misunderstanding the scope or the timeline? And finally, actual support shown. Are they helping us resolve conflicts, allocating necessary resources, and accepting difficult decisions quickly?
That last point is crucial. Support is shown through actions, not just words.
Absolutely. The verification matters because success is measured by the result of the relationship, not the activity of having a relationship. Without checking, you cannot confirm that your engagement is actually translating into increased support and value achievement.
So if we see decreased conflicts, increased institutional trust, stabilized expectations, and quicker acceptance of deliverables, those are the concrete indicators that our investment in stakeholder engagement is paying off.
Exactly. It confirms that the project is benefiting from smoother, less resistant decision-making, which saves time, money, and political capital.
We've navigated the financial landscape and the political terrain of people. Now we move to the final domain in this integrated system, the engine room, or resources. This is where the rubber meets the road, managing the tools and the talent needed to actually build the deliverable.
This domain, which is detailed in Section 2.6, focuses on planning, providing, and managing all necessary resources. And this includes human resources, the team members, consultants, vendors, and physical resources. So equipment, materials, infrastructure, technology.
In previous models, resources felt purely operational, like a component list you just check off. How has PMBOK 8 elevated the view of resources beyond simple logistics?
The modern view treats resources not as passive operational components, but as critical enablers for achieving value. The focus has shifted dramatically toward optimal use, flexibility, and most importantly, sustainability. They are a strategic asset that must be managed holistically within the integrated system. #tag 5.1 core resource concepts, the trade-offs and the focus on people. Resources are a fundamental constraint alongside time, cost, and scope. This is where strategic trade-offs become a daily reality for the project manager.
What are the key strategic resource considerations we need to balance?
We're constantly weighing trade-offs. If we need the project faster, we increase resources, which increases cost. If we cut resources to save costs, the schedule usually extends. It's all about balanced, deliberate decision-making. And we need to distinguish clearly between availability versus capacity.
Define that distinction for us.
Availability is the simple binary question. Is the resource, be it a person, a specialized crane, or a piece of software, present when needed?
Okay, are they here?
Right. But capacity is the deeper strategic question. Can that resource perform the task without being overallocated, leading to burnout, or interfering with other commitments? Capacity planning focuses specifically on avoiding team burnout and functional exhaustion. Ignoring capacity means you have an available resource that delivers poor quality because they are overworked or constantly interrupted.
So the goal isn't just to throw bodies at a problem. It's about smart allocation aimed at efficiency and productivity.
Absolutely. The goal is maximizing productivity through matching the right skills to the right tasks and distributing work effectively. This domain places a high value on reducing waste, whether it's waiting time for materials, unnecessary communication, or poorly utilized team skills. Every hour wasted is a resource hour burned.
Let's dive deeper into the modern concept you mentioned from the sources. Sustainability.
Yeah.
It applies very differently to people than it does to materials.
It does, and this is a major PMBOK 8 focus. For human resources, sustainability means ensuring long-term performance continuity by considering the team's health, safety, and job well-being. A sustainable approach avoids the short-term crunch that leads to high turnover and a loss of institutional knowledge. Leadership has to ensure workloads are balanced and that the team environment is supportive to maintain commitment. This is the antithesis of the burn and churn approach.
And for physical resources.
Here, sustainability means responsible use factoring in environmental impact, ethical sourcing, and managing the supply chain for resilience. For example, selecting locally sourced materials reduces logistical risks and carbon footprint. A project manager who ignores resource sustainability risks future supply chain disruptions or compliance failures, which have immediate financial consequences.
That really shifts resource management from simply using things up to maintaining a healthy long-term ecosystem.
It connects directly to the long-term value mandate, and leading that ecosystem is crucial. The leadership role is vital here. Leaders must empower the team, remove the operational and political obstacles that slow them down, and actively create a supportive environment. This enablement directly boosts commitment, quality, and productivity. Hashtag 5.2, the resource management processes, the practical flow.
Okay, let's move to the practical processes that ensure this engine room functions efficiently and effectively. It all starts with the foundational decision-making.
Plan resources is the strategic starting point. Here we determine the type, the quantity, and the required timing of all resources. This phase is critical for aligning resource needs directly with the project's scope, schedule, and budget. When it's done well, it significantly reduces the risk of expensive resource shortages or massive waste later on.
Once we have a plan, we move to estimate resources. I imagine accuracy here is non-negotiable because inaccuracy has immediate ripple effects.
It does. Inaccurate estimates lead directly to delays, increased costs, and team exhaustion. This process involves accurately estimating the number of people, broken down by required skills, the specific equipment, and the exact quantity of materials needed. This often involves leveraging historical data, expert judgment, and robust estimation techniques to avoid wishful thinking.
Then we have to go out and acquire resources.
Securing the resources, whether from internal transfers or external contracts, must be executed at the right time, at the right cost, and crucially, with the right competency level. The source material is very clear on this. Failure in the timely acquisition of critical resources effectively halts project execution. This makes it a high-stakes logistical and contractual activity.
Once they're acquired, they must be organized and assigned resources.
This is a critical logistics step where strategic work distribution is essential. Resources must be clearly distributed to tasks, ensuring roles and responsibilities are unambiguous. We have to proactively match skills to tasks. You wouldn't put an entry-level technician on a highly complex integration task, and balance the workload to minimize conflicts, maximize efficiency, and prevent that capacity strain we talked about.
The next process, develop resources, is where we invest in the human capital component of sustainability.
This process focuses entirely on improving team competency and cohesion through targeted training, coaching, and team-building activities. This investment shouldn't be viewed as an expense, but as a strategic maneuver that directly enhances team productivity, improves output quality, and significantly boosts team satisfaction and long-term commitment. Developing resources also includes creating cross-functional skills to increase team flexibility.
And finally, the ongoing daily work of manage and control resources.
This involves continuous, real-time monitoring during execution. You have to deal with shortages, resolve conflicts over shared resources, redistribute resources dynamically as priorities shift, and continuously compare the actual usage against the planned usage baseline. Taking prompt corrective action here ensures operational continuity, efficiency, and resource optimization. It makes sure the engine runs smoothly right up to the finish line. Hashtag outro.
So we started with the financial nexus, we explored the dynamic art of stakeholder management, and we finished in the engine room of resources. What stands out to you, and what we hope stands out to you, our listener, is how fundamentally intertwined these three areas are. They are not checklist items, they are a connected system.
The journey through these performance domains really reinforces the central mandate of PMBOK. Project management success is defined by integration, flexibility, and value. You simply cannot achieve a truly successful outcome by optimizing one domain at the expense of another. Trying to save money in finance by eliminating key stakeholder communication will inevitably lead to rework, which costs more than the initial saving.
We saw that the financial domain has to be flexible enough to adapt its funding model to the delivery approach, whether that's predictive or adaptive. We also realized that resources must be managed sustainably, focusing on human capacity and long-term well-being just as much as on timely availability.
And critically, stakeholder relationships must be actively fostered, and that means true partnership and engagement, not passive informing, to continuously shape requirements, minimize resistance, and ensure the final output is accepted and truly valuable. The success of the project is a direct function of the strength of the positive, integrated interaction between all these critical areas.
Absolutely. So since integrated financial management seeks to constantly balance risk and expected return, and stakeholder management seeks to balance influence and support, consider this as you go forward.
Yeah.
How much value are you leaving on the table right now by managing your project's money, people, and tools as three separate islands instead of one continuous interconnected continent? That's your assignment until the next deep dive. Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the densest, most influential source material, the documents that actually shape how the world operates, and extract the core knowledge you need.
And today, we are undertaking a deep dive that is, well, it's essential for anyone involved in executing strategic work. We're tackling the core philosophy of modern project delivery.
Specifically, we're focusing on the new, highly adaptive thinking that you find inside the project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK 8th edition.
That's right.
Our source material lays out what really feels like a modern blueprint for success. It really breaks down three interconnected domains: resources, risk, and then this master key that seems to bind them all together, the overarching concept of tailoring.
And we're looking at these not as, just some administrative steps to check off a list.
Exactly, not something you just file away. We see them as critical strategic levers that define whether a project actually achieves its intended value. So the mission for you, the listener, is clear. We're going far beyond a simple summary of best practices here. We need to grasp the fundamental, almost revolutionary shift the industry is undergoing.
It's a move away from that rigid operational management.
And toward truly strategic, value-driven flexibility. Okay, let's unpack this. We are hunting for those aha moments that explain why the projects celebrated as successes today are defined by adaptation, not just blind adherence.
That is the perfect framing for this. Our analysis confirms this massive paradigm shift. The ultimate measure of project success today is no longer about the strict linear completion of tasks.
Or adhering religiously to a schedule that was defined, 18 months ago?
Exactly. It's fundamentally about the project's ability to achieve realized value for the organization and its stakeholders, while simultaneously, and this is key, mastering and navigating inherent uncertainty.
So this new framework, it radically repositions resources and risk.
It does. They are no longer merely constraints to be tolerated. They're now seen as dynamic drivers that inform and, frankly, justify every major strategic decision a project manager makes throughout the entire life cycle.
All right, let's start with the linchpin then. The concept that really defines this whole modern approach, tailoring. It's all about strategic fit, isn't it?
Precisely. The core concept of tailoring is defined as the deliberate process of selecting, modifying, and aligning your project management practices, your methods, and your approaches to precisely fit the project's unique context.
So it's specific complexity, it's operational environment.
All of it. It's the ultimate rejection of the idea that project management is some kind of standardized assembly line process.
And this is really where PMBOK 8 makes its boldest statement. It explicitly asserts that there is no single, fixed model, no universal template for managing complex things like resources or risk that works for all projects.
That's it. We're seeing the formal declaration that the one-size-fits-all mentality is not just obsolete, it's actually detrimental to realizing value.
It's a risk in itself.
It is a risk in itself. It truly is a profound philosophical transition. I mean, if we look at what this shift represents in organizational terms, we're moving from an older model that prioritized demonstrating compliance.
Documenting fixed procedures, following rigid, sometimes overly bureaucratic processes.
Right. The whole focus was on doing the process right. We're now shifting to a modern model that focuses intently on outcomes, on maximizing value realization, and on intelligent, continuous adaptation.
So the goal now is doing the right things to maximize value.
You've hit the nail on the head.
That sounds great in theory, but it completely changes the entire accountability structure. If I'm a project manager, my success is now tied to adapting effectively, which means making judgment calls. How do organizations ensure consistent quality when they're constantly being asked to adapt and tailor their methodology?
That is the essential trade-off, isn't it? And the source material addresses it by defining the purpose of tailoring. It's not about chaos, it's about strategic efficiency. The purpose is, let's say, threefold. First, to maximize value by ensuring every single resource effort and every process step contributes directly to the project's objectives.
Nothing wasted.
Nothing wasted. Second, to aggressively avoid unnecessary complexity and bureaucracy. For example, a regulatory change project just doesn't need the same detailed resource tracking as a multi-million-dollar construction job.
Right, that makes sense.
And third, and this is critical, tailoring improves the speed and quality of decision-making by making sure the methodology is streamlined and aligned with the actual context. This allows the team to be, well, hyper-responsive.
So if the old PM mantra was something like, plan the work, work the plan, the new one seems to be more like, plan the work, then continuously judge if that plan is still the most valuable path forward.
That captures it perfectly. But we need to highlight the biggest conceptual hurdle that many PMs face. They tend to treat tailoring as a one-time startup step.
Right, they decide on a methodology in the charter, file it away, and that's that.
And that's that. But the reality is that the context changes constantly. Market conditions shift, new regulatory burdens appear.
Or a key technology just fails.
Exactly. So we have to emphasize that tailoring is far beyond a simple startup step. It is a continuous mindset that has to span the entire project lifecycle.
It demands constant critical thinking.
And constant, honest review of the environment, the context, the current performance indicators. If the organizational environment shifts, maybe the board demands faster delivery or a major tech vendor goes bankrupt, your resource strategy and your risk approach have to flex immediately, mid-project.
This dramatically elevates the role of the project manager, doesn't it?
Right.
They're no longer just the scheduler or the administrative rule follower.
Not at all. They have to become a strategic decision maker, an adaptive thinking leader, and a primary facilitator. They have to continually justify why they are changing the communication cadence or altering the approach to managing intellectual property, for instance.
And that adaptive leadership is non-negotiable.
Absolutely, because the risk of failure to tailor is a silent killer. An untailored approach generally leads to one of two distinct failure modes. The first is overmanagement.
So it slows the project down with unnecessary bureaucracy, processes designed for a project 10 times its size, or reporting that nobody even reads.
Exactly. And the second failure mode is catastrophic undermanagement. The chosen process just wasn't rigorous or structured enough to handle the actual level of technical or resource uncertainty that was present.
Leaving the project completely vulnerable to failure.
That's it. The PMBOK 8 insists that finding the right fit is everything.
So if tailoring provides the strategic framework, then resources must be the actual energy, the engine of project execution. We're moving into domain 2.6 here, and the guidance feels far more holistic than just simple supply chain or inventory tracking.
It is. The PMBOK 8 emphasizes that the resource domain is intensely integrated across the entire project. Resources encompass not just physical assets, but also the technical and, crucially, the behavioral aspects of the team.
So they're essential for everything else, for realistic planning.
for robust team building, for reliable project work execution, for effective measurement, and especially for adapting to uncertainty.
It's the material reality of the project.
Yeah.
But the goal has fundamentally shifted, hasn't it? The ultimate goal is not just ticking a box that says the resources were allocated.
Right. It's explicitly about supporting value delivery through the optimal and, critically, the sustainable use of both human and material resources.
And that leads us to the key success indicators. So success is measured by much more than just having resources available on paper.
Yes, we look for tangible results that confirm value is being delivered responsibly. For instance, resources must be available in a timely manner. If the equipment shows up 2 weeks late, the project is already compromised regardless of how good the equipment is.
And then there's optimal utilization. The source makes a really crucial point here.
It does. We must achieve optimal utilization, and this is the vital part, without waste or professional burnout. That emphasis on human sustainability is a monumental shift. It means the success of resource management is now tied to the long-term health of your human capital.
So things like high team stability and satisfaction, that's now a direct measure of good resource management.
It's a direct consequence, yes. High attrition among your top talent is a direct resource management failure. And finally, of course, achieving the planned productivity while operating within the approved constraints, delivering on time and within budget.
It really seems like resource management is now this complex balancing act. You're balancing the need for speed and optimization against the absolute necessity of preserving the team. How do you even begin to tailor an approach to meet all those potentially conflicting metrics at the same time?
That's the challenge.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source material outlines 9 specific factors that must drive your flexibility and tailoring decisions when it comes to managing people, equipment, and knowledge. These are the pressure points that dictate your strategy.
The first factor is 1, project size and complexity. This dictates the necessary organizational structure and the complexity of your planning tools.
So for smaller projects, the structure can be simpler. Team members are more like generalists. They fill multiple roles, which probably leads to faster communication.
It does. And resource tracking might be handled with a simple spreadsheet. But for large or complex projects, say building a new national infrastructure system, you require specialized, clearly delineated teams, often with hierarchical structures.
And you need advanced tools, right, for forecasting, capacity planning, critical path analysis.
Absolutely. Tailoring here means defining the appropriate level of bureaucratic structure. Not too much, not too little.
The second factor is 2, type of resources used. And here we have to manage fundamentally different things.
That's right. We have to distinguish between managing tangible resources, the physical equipment, raw materials, technical infrastructure, versus the intellectual and knowledge resources.
Things like specific expertise, patents, or just pure creativity.
Exactly. Managing a fleet of cranes requires a focus on maintenance logs and depreciation. Managing a team of specialized data scientists, on the other hand, requires a focus on professional development, knowledge transfer, and psychological safety to foster innovation. The management style has to be tailored to the asset type.
Then there's the third factor, 3, resource availability and scarcity. This seems like a practical constraint, but it should heavily influence your risk strategy too.
Oh, it changes everything. If resources are easily available, standard materials, common labor, you have much greater flexibility in allocation and scheduling.
But if they are scarce or in high demand, like a consultant with some niche regulatory knowledge,
then it requires meticulous advanced planning, clear prioritization across the entire organization, and you absolutely must invest in backup or alternative plans, maybe even cross-training other staff.
So tailoring here involves adjusting your schedule to reduce dependencies on that single scarce point of failure.
You have to. Next up is 4, organizational environment. How much of resource management is simply dictated by the corporate culture you're operating within?
A huge amount, I'd imagine.
A huge amount. If you're in a traditional, hierarchical, or highly compliance-driven organization, your resource management has to include formal processes, documented approval chains, and strict adherence to internal policies.
But if you're in an agile or rapid development environment,
then your tailoring should prioritize self-organizing, empowered teams, and rapid decision-making to align with the company's culture. Your resource plan needs to fit the existing corporate structure, not fight against it.
The fifth factor, 5, development approach life cycle, directly dictates when resources are needed.
This is a critical tailoring point. A predictive approach, waterfall model, demands detailed, upfront resource planning. You need everything scheduled, budgeted, potentially procured months in advance.
Whereas an agile approach is the opposite.
It is. It requires flexible allocation, demands highly stable teams, which often means you minimize rotating people in and out to preserve institutional knowledge, and a focus on continuous adjustment, sprint by sprint, or phase by phase.
And a hybrid approach forces you to manage both systems at once.
Exactly. Advanced planning for the stable parts and flexible adaptation for the uncertain ones.
Okay, now for 6, team skill level and experience. I imagine throwing junior people at a complex problem requires a completely different resource strategy than managing a team of seasoned veterans.
Completely different. High-experienced teams need less supervision, they benefit from greater empowerment, and you manage largely by outcomes. The resource strategy there is about removing roadblocks.
But newer teams, or teams with a high churn rate,
They require constant coaching, structured support, defined standard operating procedures, and focused training plans. Tailoring here means adjusting your leadership style and allocating specific senior resources for mentoring roles.
number 7 is just unavoidable in the modern world. 7, geographic and remote considerations.
Yes, managing distributed teams, especially across global time zones, introduces unique resource challenges. You have communication latency, differing labor laws, and just the simple difficulty of maintaining cohesion and accountability.
Versus co-located teams, which benefit from faster, direct interaction.
Right. So the tailoring impact is choosing the right high-fidelity collaboration tools and establishing critical overlapping work hours. You simply cannot treat a globally dispersed team like they're all sitting in the same room. Their communication needs are distinct resource requirements.
Let's spend some real time on number 8. 8, sustainability and professional well-being. This is where the PMBOK really recognizes that human resources are not machines.
This represents perhaps the greatest change in human resource strategy. Acknowledging the necessity of managing workload, health, safety, and work-life balance is essential because it is a direct driver of long-term risk.
The source explicitly highlights the need to avoid long-term burnout.
It does, and this requires specific resource tailoring. Things like flexible scheduling, actively balancing task distribution, not just assigning tasks based on who is available, but on their actual capacity limits, and creating policies that genuinely support human durability.
But practically, let's say a critical deadline is looming. How does a PM justify pulling back a star performer to avoid burnout? That feels like a classic conflict between short-term value and long-term sustainability.
It is the ultimate trade-off, and the PMBOK 8 says you must make that trade-off in favor of sustainability. Failure here leads directly to quantifiable project risk.
High turnover, loss of proprietary knowledge.
Immediate spikes in recruitment costs, and massive delays due to the loss of that expertise. Effective tailoring recognizes that a rested, stable team is the most valuable resource you have.
So sacrificing it for a short-term gain almost always results in a net negative impact on the overall value delivered.
Almost always. Finally, there's 9. Constraints and regulations. You can't tailor your way out of the law.
No, you can't.
Precisely. This involves the non-negotiable necessity of adhering to all local and international labor laws, mandated safety requirements, and any specific contractual terms that might govern resource use. Your tailored plan must always fit strictly within those legal and contractual obligations.
Okay, so once we've executed the plan based on all these tailored factors, we reach the critical check results phase. The purpose here isn't just to confirm completion, right? It's to assess the effectiveness of our management.
And to ensure resources actually contributed to project value. We look past mere procedural compliance and we analyze 6 core areas. First is resource availability.
Were all resources, human and physical, secured exactly when the plan required them? Were there critical gaps, delays in hiring, procurement issues that stalled the work?
Second, resource utilization efficiency. This involves a detailed comparison of actual utilization versus the initial plan. Are resources sitting idle, causing wasteful overhead?
Or is the reverse happening? Is there excessive pressure and systematic overwork on specific resources, which would signal a massive burnout risk?
Exactly. We need to measure actual versus expected productivity. Third is human resource performance. This is both a qualitative and quantitative assessment. We evaluate the team's skills growth, their commitment, and we constantly monitor key metrics that signal systemic issues.
Like voluntary attrition rates or declining engagement scores. Those are direct flags that resource management is failing the human domain.
They are. Fourth is resource material usage. This is the physical assets check. analyzing equipment uptime, maintenance, material consumption rates, and comparing waste or damage against your projections. Minimizing waste is directly maximizing value.
Fifth, cost commitment. Were the resource costs within the approved budget?
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, did the value delivered actually justify those expenditures?
Yes. We analyzed significant cost deviations and immediately find the root cause, whether it was poor planning or a realized risk.
And the final, future-focused check, the sustainability check.
Were resources utilized in a way that preserved the team's health and minimized negative long-term impacts? Did we create a sustainable operational tempo, or did we just mortgage the team's future productivity to hit a short-term milestone?
The profound part seems to be how these results are actually used. They don't just sit in a report.
No, they feed back directly into the ongoing tailoring decisions. If we find utilization inefficiency in one area, we adjust our task distribution models immediately. If we notice high turnover, we adjust our coaching and support models.
Or make strategic decisions about training versus outsourcing.
Exactly. It drives a continuous improvement cycle.
Okay, so if resources are the engine, risk management is the navigation system that anticipates the upcoming weather patterns. This domain, 2.7, represents a real maturity leap in PMBOK.
It really does. The older, rigid definition of risk was almost purely negative. It was just something bad that might happen. The modern approach is far more balanced.
So how does PMBOK 8 define risk now?
It's defined as an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has either a positive impact, an opportunity, or a negative impact, a threat on your project objectives.
That reframing, that proactive search for opportunity, that feels like the big strategic shift.
Yeah.
We're moving away from reactive, purely defensive firefighting risk management
To a strategic posture where risk is integrated into value creation, and we trace all risk back to its source. Uncertainty.
Uncertainty in requirements, in technology.
In shifting market demands, in resource availability, in the regulatory environment. Effective risk management isn't about trying to eliminate all uncertainty, which is often impossible, especially in innovation projects.
So what is it about then?
It's about understanding it, quantifying it, and preparing the organization to adapt to its inevitable effects.
This brings us right back to value. If we're overly conservative and we only manage the threats, we severely limit our potential upside.
Absolutely. That is the core of the risk and value connection. Strategic risk management has to constantly balance the anticipated return against the level of exposure. The sources are clear on this. Some calculated risks are not just acceptable, they are necessary to achieve the organization's highest strategic value.
So if a competitor is aiming for a 5x return with some disruptive technology, your risk strategy can't just be built around a safe 1x strategy.
You have to take measured risks to compete.
But before any of those strategic choices can be made, the organization has to articulate how much risk it can tolerate. That's where these internal boundaries come in.
Yes, risk appetite is the high-level, overarching amount of risk an entire organization is willing to accept to achieve its strategic mission. It's cultural, it's broad, and it's relatively enduring.
A startup has a massive risk appetite. A public utility, probably a very small one.
Exactly. And then risk threshold is the specific acceptable boundary of risk for this particular project or work package. It's the tactical application of that appetite.
And these boundaries have immense practical impact.
They do, because they dictate your strategy selection. For instance, an organization with a high appetite might intentionally choose strategies to exploit positive opportunities, dedicating resources to maximize their likelihood.
Whereas a conservative, highly regulated organization, low appetite, will prioritize avoidance or mitigation strategies for threats.
Right, and they may only accept opportunities that fall well within their defined low-risk threshold. These boundaries have to be clearly communicated to the project team.
So PMBOK 8 organizes risk management into 7 processes. And it's vital to stress that these are dynamic and iterative, not just a rigid checklist you complete once at the start.
It's a cycle of constant vigilance. 1. Plan risk management is the foundational step. This is where we establish the framework, defining who is responsible for risk, choosing the methodology.
Like a Monte Carlo simulation versus a simple probability and impact matrix.
Correct. And crucially, setting those specific risk thresholds we just discussed, making sure they're aligned with the overall organizational risk culture.
2. Identify risks is the proactive step, scanning the horizon to recognize both potential threats and opportunities.
And you draw on sources like requirements documentation, resource planning, stakeholder analysis, all of that. These get documented in the risk register, which has to be a living document. The principle here is simple. The earlier you identify a risk or an opportunity, the lower the cost of managing it.
Then comes the analysis. 3. Qualitative risk analysis is the prioritization step.
Yes, we use techniques to assess probability and impact to score the risks. This allows the team to focus its limited resources, time, and attention on the risks that pose the highest threat or offer the greatest opportunity.
But that qualitative analysis isn't always enough for the big bets. When do we need to level up to quantitative analysis?
That's the threshold. 4. Quantitative risk analysis is usually reserved for the most critical, highest impact risks on large or complex projects, or where the stakes are just immense.
So this is where you use numerical methods, financial modeling, schedule simulations like Monte Carlo.
You do. And the immense value this provides is helping the organization determine the optimal and justified level of time and financial contingency reserves. It moves reserves from a guessing game to a calculated necessity.
With the analysis done, we move to action in step 5. 5. Plan risk responses, developing specific, actionable strategies.
And they have to be tailored precisely to the type of risk. For threats, the strategies are avoid, so change the plan so the risk just can't occur. Mitigate, transfer, or accept.
And for opportunities, the positive risks, there are parallel strategies.
Yes. Exploit, take steps to guarantee it happens. Enhance, share, or accept.
Step 6 is where the rubber hits the road. 6. Implement risk responses.
And implementation has to be timely. The plan responses can't just stay on a document. They must be integrated directly into the project schedule and work plan. This ensures the response is executed when required and that the necessary resources circling back to Domain 2.6 are available and ready.
A response plan too late is a response failed.
Absolutely. And finally, the constant monitoring. 7. Monitor risks. This is the continuous loop. We track known risks to see if our responses are working. We monitor residual risks.
The risk that's left over after mitigation.
Correct. And we're constantly scanning for emerging new risks that weren't initially identified. This step is about assessing the effectiveness of your responses and ensuring the whole risk approach stays flexible.
So the entire risk process itself needs to be tailored to the environment. Why is this flexibility so important, and what are the factors that drive it?
Because projects vary so wildly in complexity, novelty, and the stability of their environment. The source material warns that over-managing risk using all 7 processes and quantitative analysis on a small, predictable project causes significant slowdowns and massively increased costs.
But under-managing a high-stakes, innovative project causes catastrophic surprises.
Exactly. Tailoring is the pursuit of finding that crucial strategic balance.
Let's detail the key tailoring factors for risk.
Project size and complexity is the primary one. A simple, low-complexity project can rely mainly on qualitative analysis and simple response strategies. But complex, multi-phase, high-stakes projects require the full suite. Quantitative analysis, advanced modeling, and highly structured, formal risk governance.
The second one is uncertainty and innovation level.
This is key. Traditional projects have known recurring risks we can almost pull from a template. But highly innovative or unprecedented projects inherently have high unknown risks and massive potential opportunities.
So those projects need a much greater focus on early discovery, more flexibility in response plans.
And sometimes actively embracing a higher level of calculated risk to achieve that potential breakthrough.
And the organizational risk appetite we defined earlier directly determines the shape of the tailored process.
Precisely. A conservative organization naturally tailors its process toward avoidance and mitigation, increasing the rigor of governance and documentation. A bold organization will tailor toward opportunity identification and exploitation, maybe even streamlining the process to capture fleeting chances quickly.
So the process itself has to reflect the company's comfort level with uncertainty.
It must. And finally, we have to consider the available resources for risk management. Risk analysis and response planning take time, money, and expertise.
Right.
If your resources, both specialized people and analytical tools, are limited, then your tailoring must pragmatically focus effort only on the most critical, highest impact risks. You have to prioritize depth where it matters most, even if it means sacrificing coverage on lower impact issues.
We've broken down resources and risk, but the true brilliance of PMBOK 8 seems to be this explicit emphasis on integration. You can't manage one without the other.
Absolutely. The PMBOK 8 fundamentally emphasizes that no performance domain operates in a silo. Resources and risk are not separate departments in a company. They're dynamic, interacting elements that constantly influence every other domain of the project.
So what does this all mean for the PM? It means we have to recognize that the relationship between these core elements and the rest of the project is a critical, non-secondary relationship.
Yes. A failure to manage resource availability, for example, is not just a resource problem.
No, it immediately translates into a scheduling risk, a budget risk, and potentially a stakeholder expectation risk. The failure cascades instantly.
Let's explore how resources weave into the rest of the work. Resource decisions have a massive impact on planning. Resource constraints. For example, if a specific piece of equipment is tied up for an extra month on another job, directly invalidate the realism of your schedule and your budget assumptions.
If the plan assumed access to a specific expert and that access is denied, the entire task dependency chain just breaks.
It does, and resources are the absolute foundation of the team domain. Human resources are the people who form the team, so your resource allocation decisions directly affect team size, stability, morale, and long-term commitment.
We mentioned it earlier, but overallocation inevitably leads to burnout.
Which fractures the team domain and necessitates expensive, unplanned hiring or resource problem that started as a scheduling pressure.
And when it comes to project work execution, that's entirely dependent on the timely availability and efficiency of resources.
Shortages cause stoppages, they apply pressure to substitute materials, and they frequently lead to drastic quality drops because corners are cut to compensate for the lack of available time or skilled personnel.
And resources directly impact delivery. Qualified, well-supported resources impact output quality and speed.
Conversely, the use of unqualified or inexperienced resources, maybe due to a budgeting constraint, leads directly to rework, wasted effort, and may ultimately result in deliverables being rejected by the customer, which is the ultimate failure to realize value.
Now let's look at how risk interacts. It seems to function as this pervasive linking element across the entire project structure.
It really does. Risk has a constant dynamic interaction with stakeholders. Stakeholders are often sources of risk themselves. Conflicting expectations, resistance to change, poor communication can all be classified as external risks.
And they're also the ones directly affected by risk outcomes.
Exactly. So good risk management requires early engagement, revealing these conflicts, which fundamentally improves stakeholder communication and builds trust in the project process.
Risk also directly dictates planning. High-severity risk necessitates detailed contingency plans. It affects the underlying assumptions and constraints of the project.
And it influences the reality of scope clarity. For example, if we identify high uncertainty around a technological integration, that uncertainty has to be planned for via phased implementation or backup strategies, transforming the plan itself.
This brings us back to that risk and resources key overlap. This feels like the critical synergy we need to master.
It is. Effective resource management inherently minimizes operational risks. For instance, ensuring all team members are cross-trained, that's a resource decision, significantly reduces the risk of a schedule delay if a key person leaves.
And conversely, effective risk identification reveals critical resource needs early.
Yes, if we identify a high-risk compliance threat, that threat immediately necessitates securing specialized legal expertise, a resource decision driven purely by risk management.
And risk interacts heavily with measurement. Performance indicators serve as essential early warning signals for potential risks.
Right. A metric showing an unexpected cost overrun signals an imminent financial threat. A sudden decline in productivity over 2 sprints signals a quality risk or a burnout risk. Measurement should ideally function as predictive risk indicators.
So the ability to manage these interdependencies, to understand that a decision to save budget by using cheaper materials isn't just a procurement decision, but a high-severity quality and rework risk, is what defines the successful adaptive PM in this PMBOK era.
They see the entire system, not just their silo.
We've reached the final cycle in our framework, the audit point. We're checking results for both domains, and we have to assess for effectiveness and value, not merely procedural compliance.
Precisely. The goal of this phase is not historical reporting. It's to provide essential, timely input for continuous improvement and to trigger early corrective action before recurrent problems metastasize into organizational crises.
The feedback loop has to be closed rapidly.
It does.
So what are the specific assessment points when checking the effectiveness of the risk management process?
We evaluate 4 major areas in the overall risk process. First, the efficacy of identification, where the main threats and opportunities captured early in the process. The key success indicator is having few unforeseen critical risks or surprise opportunities.
So if a major crisis blindsided the project, the identification phase failed.
It failed. Second, the effectiveness of responses. Did the mitigation or exploitation responses we implemented actually reduce the probability or impact of the threat, or increase the likelihood of the opportunity? We need to know if the mitigation plan worked as intended or if we just wasted resources on an ineffective response.
Third, management of residual risks. Did the accepted remaining risks, the ones we decided to live with because the cost of mitigation was too high, did they turn into uncontrolled crises?
If residual risks consistently blow past the threshold, it means the initial risk tolerance was set too high or the assessment of probability and impact was flawed.
And fourth, reserve usage.
Was the use of time and financial contingency reserves justified and properly governed? We have to track and justify their usage. Reserves are not an organizational buffer for poor planning. They're capital held aside for realized, identified risks.
So if reserves are depleted quickly, it suggests poor response planning or a failure to implement responses on time.
That's right. The overall focus remains on value. Did risk management actually protect project value and enable objectives to be met despite all the uncertainty?
Let's get intensely practical for the listener. What are the undeniable, visible signs that my resource and risk management system is fundamentally failing, regardless of what the status report says?
There are some very clear organizational failure indicators. If you observe the repetition of the same risks, say technology integration issues or key personnel leaving across different projects or phases, that signifies a crucial lack of organizational learning.
So the risk process isn't feeding back into the next project's planning.
It's not. Another indicator is an over-reliance on reserves, constantly having to dip into the contingency budget for foreseeable issues. This suggests poor initial planning or a consistent failure to implement risk response plans effectively when the warning signs first appeared.
And the most obvious, visible sign of failure must be the appearance of major surprises.
The sudden, catastrophic, unforeseen event that throws the project into a tailspin. This is a clear failure of early detection and monitoring. You'll also see late decisions or delayed reactions to issues because the monitoring system wasn't fast or granular enough to trigger action.
And bringing it back to resources, which is so often overlooked until it's too late, what does a resource failure look like?
It looks like resource drain, which the source material explicitly highlights. It says, weak management of operations leads directly to project failure even with funding available. This is critical.
You might have the budget, but if you have high burnout, low morale, and resulting high turnover,
you've lost the necessary institutional knowledge and productivity. Resource drain, despite having available financial reserves, is a fatal failure point because money cannot instantly buy back lost time or proprietary expertise.
So all of this detailed auditing and performance assessment feeds us right back to the beginning of the strategic cycle.
Exactly. The results and the lessons learned from both the resources assessment and the risk assessment are the core data points that feed back directly into the initial tailoring considerations for the next phase or iteration.
So if the resource management system led to burnout, we have to tailor a slower cadence and a higher reserve model.
And if the risk management failed to capture opportunities, we tailor the identification process to be broader. This assessment informs precisely how practices should be changed, whether we need more formality, less bureaucracy, a different development approach, or new tools.
This commitment to measuring effectiveness and feeding that learning back into the methodology is the single most important action that raises the organizational maturity level over time.
It makes every project smarter than the last one.
This has been a deep dive into the nervous system of modern project execution. The PMBOK 8 fundamentally shifts project management from a function of rigid compliance to an integrated, adaptive act of strategy.
That's a great way to put it.
The key takeaway for you, the listener, is this. PMBOK 8 demands that project management be a flexible, integrated, and strategic function centered entirely around realizing long-term value. Project success is not static. It's dependent on the harmony and the quality of interaction between these performance domains.
Especially that critical continuous link between maintaining resource stability and executing a proactive risk strategy.
Absolutely.
To synthesize that critical synergy, effective resource management ensuring optimal, sustainable utilization and actively avoiding burnout inherently minimizes operational risks like delays, quality failure, and attrition.
And at the same time.
Concurrently, effective risk management ensures that the necessary resources are strategically identified and allocated optimally, focusing them only on the highest priority threats and the most valuable opportunities. Failure to tailor these two elements simultaneously leads inevitably to resource depletion, budget overruns, and ultimately a loss of quality and realized value.
It's a downward spiral.
It is. And here is a final provocative thought for you to consider and take into your next initiative. The concept of risk-based thinking insists that every single project decision, no matter how small, from scheduling a meeting to signing a contract, should account for what might happen. Given the critical link between resources and risk, how can you apply this thinking to ensure you balance protecting your most valuable assets against threats while simultaneously prioritizing the calculated risks necessary to seize opportunities and achieve maximum value? Is your next decision defensive, or is it strategically aggressive?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex frameworks and systems, strip them down to the foundational insights, and, well, hopefully hand you the knowledge shortcut.
Today, we are tackling something pretty fundamental. We're moving beyond that comfortable, but let's be honest, increasingly outdated idea that project management is just a fixed template.
A one-size-fits-all thing you just sort of overlay onto any initiative.
Exactly, regardless of the industry, the size, the team, anything.
Yeah, and the material we receive for this one really focuses on one of the most strategic and I'd say almost philosophical shifts in the modern PM world. It's all formalized in the new PMBOK guide, the 8th edition, and the concept is tailoring.
And it's so much more than just tweaking a few documents.
Well, absolutely. This isn't just adjusting a template. We're talking about a full-scale strategic mandate that really redefines what a project manager even does.
And this shift, it's a direct response to decades of criticism. The feeling that standardized methodologies were just too prescriptive. They were creating bureaucracy, not efficiency.
Right. We've all felt that pain.
So the 8th edition, it establishes this philosophical foundation for tailoring right at the beginning in section 3.1. It takes tailoring from this kind of optional, nice-to-have activity.
And makes it a core driver of success.
Yeah.
It's not optional anymore.
It's mandatory.
And that overview, it really gives us our mission statement for this deep dive. I think the one takeaway that has to stick with you right now from the very start is this. Project success is measured not by the quantity of practices you apply, but by their suitability to the context.
That's the whole game right there.
Yeah. I mean, if you're still using a 100-step governance process for a simple 10-day feature release, you are fundamentally misunderstanding what modern project success even looks like.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to deep dive into the strategic mandate of tailoring. We'll explore the why is this so critical today? Then the what parts of the PM system can you actually customize? And finally, the practical systematic process for actually doing it right.
Okay, let's unpack that first big question then. The why. Why is tailoring not just, a secondary option, but a fundamental necessity for project success? I mean, the traditional mindset, the one we all learned, says that a standard, repeatable methodology. That's the definition of predictability and safety. So where does that old wisdom fail now?
Well, that traditional, that rigid viewpoint is precisely what the 8th edition is pushing back against, hard. Tailoring is presented as essential because the goal isn't compliance anymore.
It's not about checking the boxes.
No. The goal is value realization. We have to make sure project management serves the real context, the actual needs of the work, the team, the environment, not just a formal adherence to standards printed in the book.
Because if you apply a rigid standard to a flexible, uncertain world,
it's a recipe for disaster, or at best, just catastrophic inefficiency, wasted effort, and a really frustrated team.
The sources make this first point crystal clear. It sounds obvious, but no two projects are exactly alike.
It sounds obvious, but our processes often pretend they are.
Right. We enforce these organizational templates that treat them the same, but they differ wildly. I mean, in scope, objectives, complexity, risks.
Yeah.
And the big one, stakeholders.
That's the bedrock truth. It's the foundation we have to accept before we even start. If you try to apply the same approach, the same methodology, the same level of documentation, the same meeting schedule to every single project in your portfolio, you're guaranteeing weak results.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Imagine you're managing a multi-year dam construction project. It's highly predictive, highly regulated. Now imagine trying to manage that with the exact same reporting and planning tools you'd use for say, a 6-month internal software security update.
Which needs to be super adaptive.
Super adaptive. You'd either drown the security team in completely unnecessary paperwork, slowing them to a crawl.
Or you would fatally undergovern the damn construction.
Yeah.
You'd miss critical safety checks.
Exactly. Tailoring is the mechanism that allows management to align itself perfectly with the uniqueness of each project. It's really the only way to get proportional targeted control.
Okay, this next part is where I think it gets really interesting, because it connects to this bigger shift in the whole PM profession. The 8th edition is laser-focused on achieving value, not just delivering outputs.
Yeah.
Let's dig into that distinction because it's so important. Output versus value.
It's a monumental shift. It really is. I mean, previously, project success was often defined as delivering the scope, on time, on budget. The old triple constraint.
Right, the iron triangle.
And that whole model focuses on output. For example, the output is 500 lines of code and a new customer service portal. Done. Success.
But what if no one uses it?
Exactly. If that new portal doesn't actually improve the customer experience, or it doesn't reduce call center volumes, then its value is 0. Or maybe even negative if it's confusing and people hate it.
So tailoring becomes the main tool we use to make sure we don't end up delivering this perfect output that has 0 actual value.
Precisely. Tailoring helps you direct effort, money, and your team's precious time solely toward what creates actual measurable value in that specific context. It's the #1 tool for avoiding all those non-value-adding activities.
The bureaucracy.
The bureaucracy, the pointless hurdles, the unnecessary approval meetings, the excessive reporting that just consumes resources without moving the needle on the actual business objective.
So the rule is, if a process doesn't add value or reduce a critical risk,
tailoring says you should reduce it or just get rid of it.
Yeah.
The core premise is so powerful. Value is context dependent, so the processes you use to get there must also be context dependent.
wow. That completely flips the accountability model for PMs. We're no longer judging them by how many processes they followed perfectly.
No, we're judging them by how skillfully they eliminated the unnecessary ones to focus the team on the true value drivers.
Okay, so that leads right into this idea of reducing complexity, the anti-bureaucracy mandate.
This point is so practical. I think it resonates with every single person who's ever worked on a project. Rigidly applying every possible practice and tool just because it exists in the company handbook or the PMO template. It creates this massive administrative burden. We call it overhead.
Oh, we've all been there. The project where it feels like 40% of the team's time is spent just updating 3 different tracking systems that nobody actually looks at.
That's the administrative inertia we're talking about. It slows down every decision, it distracts the people who are supposed to be doing the actual skilled work, and it just creates friction.
But here's the pushback I always hear. If we cut too much of that, bureaucracy, don't we risk losing important things, like audit trails or compliance oversight?
And that tension is the very heart of effective tailoring. It's not about chaos, it's about finding that balance.
The balance between efficiency and accountability.
Exactly. Tailoring addresses that by demanding proportionality. It lets you simplify procedures and eliminate unnecessary steps, but only where the risk versus value calculation makes sense.
Okay, so for a regulated financial project.
For that project, your tailoring might simplify the format of a report, but it's not going to touch the sign-off hierarchy. That's a critical control.
But for an internal website redesign.
For that, tailoring might let you eliminate the formal change control board entirely. You could opt for immediate team consensus instead. The result is a system that's focused on the outcome, it's more efficient, and it can respond much faster. You're optimizing for speed while maintaining just enough control.
And that speed is critical. I mean, modern projects, especially in tech or fast-moving markets, are basically defined by uncertainty. A fixed, predictive plan can be obsolete the minute you finish the launch meeting.
That is absolutely correct. In these unstable, changing, highly uncertain environments, rigidity basically guarantees failure. A traditional waterfall approach, it locks you into a structure that just breaks the moment requirements shift, and that forces incredibly costly rework, or worse, leads to you delivering a perfect product that nobody wants anymore.
So how does tailoring help with that kind of constant flux?
It enables structural flexibility. It pushes the project manager. It forces them to consider and adopt frameworks like adaptive or hybrid that are built for change. They expect it. They welcome it.
You're designing a system that anticipates change rather than fighting it.
Yes. The mandate is to modify the approach as you go, You might increase the frequency of stakeholder feedback, you shorten your planning horizons, you build contingency buffers specifically to manage that flux. You're not trying to prevent change, you're trying to manage it gracefully.
You mentioned resistance earlier, and this next point is where so many technically perfect plans just die. The cultural fit.
Right. You can have the most brilliant methodology in the world, but if the team or the organization resists it because it clashes with their fundamental DNA, it will fail. It's that simple.
I can see that. Trying to implement a super formal, documentation-heavy approach in a fast and loose Silicon Valley startup, that's a recipe for disaster. You get passive resistance, low commitment, people just working around the process.
Precisely. Every organization has a unique culture, a set of values, a specific maturity level when it comes to project management. Tailoring is what ensures the project method actually fits the organizational DNA.
So if a company values consensus,
Then your tailoring should introduce more participative decision-making forums. If the organization is very hierarchical, your tailoring needs to respect that chain of command for escalations, even if you're using an agile approach on the ground. It ensures acceptance, it gets you better participation, and that directly leads to a higher chance of success.
the PMBOK 8 also explicitly recognizes that the project world isn't monolithic anymore. We have predictive, adaptive, iterative, all these different approaches. Tailoring seems to be the mechanism for choosing the right one.
It is the decision mechanism, and each of those approaches demands completely different methods, different planning horizons, and radically different levels of control and oversight.
The processes you'd use to manage the risk of building a new jet engine are just fundamentally different from the ones you'd use for a new marketing campaign.
Totally different worlds. And we'll get into the specifics of those approaches later, but the core idea here is that tailoring is the mandate. It's what allows the project manager to select the most appropriate single approach, or, more and more commonly, a hybrid that combines them to match the project and its environment.
Okay, so we've established why tailoring is so crucial for alignment, efficiency, flexibility, value. But let's flip it. Let's look at the negative side. What are the inevitable consequences if an organization just rigidly applies a single standard to everything?
The sources are pretty clear here. It's a powerful warning based on decades of observation. Rigid application of standards will inevitably lead to 3 systemic failures.
Okay, what are they?
First, pervasive bureaucracy. Second, team apathy and resistance. And third, a weak, diluted focus on actual value.
And that creates a dangerous paradox.
A very dangerous one. A project might achieve what we call formal compliance. Every form is signed, every gate review is passed, every meeting is held. Perfect on paper. But it can still fail spectacularly to achieve its true objectives, delivering that measurable business value that satisfies the customer or the market.
In other words, you can be perfectly compliant, but completely and utterly irrelevant.
Exactly. The whole focus shifts from solving the problem to satisfying the process, and that is the death knell of modern project success.
Which raises a really important question for us. If the philosophy is clear, we have to adapt. How do we go from this philosophical why to the practical what? What's actually on the tailoring menu that we're allowed to customize?
Okay, so that takes us to the next big piece.
The scope feels massive.
Yeah.
I mean, if we accept that everything has to be customized, what exactly is in scope? It feels like the entire PM system is fair game. And that could be pretty daunting for a newer project manager.
It can feel daunting, which is why the 8th edition breaks it down so systematically. The core principle to remember is that every element in project management can be tailored as long as it serves the goal of achieving value and aligns with the organization's goals.
So it's not chaos. There's a guiding principle.
Absolutely. The degree of tailoring is always determined by the context, the complexity, and the level of uncertainty in the project. And the guide helps us by organizing this into 10 core elements we can tailor.
Okay, let's walk through them. First up, performance domains. These are the broad areas we focus on, like stakeholder engagement or planning.
Yeah.
How do you tailor something that abstract?
You tailor them by adjusting the level of focus and the depth of application. This is a huge strategic choice you make right at the beginning.
For example,
For instance, if you're managing a super high-risk project, let's say bringing a new medical device to market, you need an intense maximum focus on the risk domain and the quality domain. That means dedicating significant time and resources to rigorous testing, formal approvals, documentation.
right. But if the project is more of a creative endeavor, like designing a new brand identity, where the risk is mainly about whether people will like it,
Then your tailoring dictates a much lighter focus on the formal risk domain, but a massive prioritization of the stakeholder domain and the team domain. You're going to prioritize continuous feedback loops, creative sprints, and making sure all the design and marketing stakeholders are perfectly aligned. The depth of application just shifts radically based on where the real threat or opportunity is.
Okay, number 2, project lifecycle. This sounds like the big picture architecture of the whole project.
It is. It's fundamental. We tailor the life cycle by customizing the number of phases. Do we need 4 distinct phases or 6, or is it just a continuous delivery model? We tailor the length of those phases. And critically, we define the decision points, the gates, or review points.
And this is where we choose between predictive, adaptive, or a hybrid.
Yes. A heavily tailored life cycle for a predictive construction project might have these very strict, resource-intensive gates, like a full financial audit before you can start building. But for an adaptive software project, the gate might just be a 2-hour retrospective and planning session at the end of a sprint. Very different levels of formality.
Next is the development approach. So if the life cycle is the architecture, this is more the operational style, how the work gets done day to day.
Perfect analogy. We modify the approach to planning, execution, and control. This includes determining the velocity of the work and deciding if we need to blend multiple approaches together.
And a major tailoring decision here, I assume, is the level of documentation required. That seems to dictate the team's speed.
Absolutely. The documents are the evidence of the process, right? A highly regulated project might demand dense, multi-stage sign-offs and documentation for every single feature. But a rapid software feature release might only require a brief user story on a digital card and a passing unit test.
So tailoring means asking that critical question.
What is the absolute minimum documentation needed to satisfy compliance and support the long-term health of this specific deliverable? Anything more is waste.
Okay, next up, processes and practices. This feels like where we get to that anti-bureaucracy goal we talked about. This is where we cut the fat.
It is.
Yeah.
The source material is so explicit here. It is not necessary to use all processes or use them at the same level of detail. This is a direct mandate to simplify.
The golden rule.
The golden rule for tailoring here is what doesn't add value should be reduced or eliminated. So you tailor by adjusting the number of required status meetings. Maybe a 15-minute daily stand-up replaces a 2-hour weekly review. You adjust the reporting level, the formality. This is where the project manager acts as a ruthless efficiency editor.
All right, number 5 is tools and techniques. This has to depend heavily on the maturity of the organization and the team's skills.
It's all about proportionality. You have to select tools based on the project's complexity, the team's skills, and what technology is even available. For a small, simple internal project, tailoring might mean just using a shared spreadsheet and a physical whiteboard. Simple.
But for a multi-billion-dollar project with complex modeling.
For that project, tailoring mandates using advanced quantitative risk analysis tools, complex simulation software, and a fully integrated project management information system. Using the wrong tool can either overwhelm a simple project with complexity or fatally under-resource a complex one.
Next is roles and responsibilities. We're tailoring the human element here.
And this can change the very identity of the PM. Do you need a traditional project director who issues commands and controls all the resources? Or in an adaptive environment, do you need a facilitator, a servant leader whose main job is just to clear obstacles for a self-organizing team?
That's a huge shift in posture for a PM.
It is. You customize the PM's role, you customize the level of delegation, how much decision-making authority gets pushed down to the team, and you customize the team's structure itself. For a distributed, highly skilled team, tailoring might mandate a very flat structure with maximum delegation. But for a team building a physical product with strict safety rules, a more hierarchical command and control structure might be the right tailored approach.
Okay, governance and decision-making. I can see how slow governance would just kill an adaptive project.
Yeah.
If you need to pivot fast, you need the approvals to match.
That is the key insight. Tailoring governance means modifying the number of required approvals, the escalation levels, the makeup of review committees. A project in a fast-changing market needs lighter, quicker governance. Maybe you delegate all authority to a single product owner to allow for those rapid pivots.
But for a huge capital construction project,
for that, you need heavy, multi-stage governance, maybe involving external regulators and complex financial approval cycles. You have to manage massive financial risk. The tailored governance system has to respect the organization's need for accountability while still maintaining the project's velocity.
number 8, Communication and reporting.
And this isn't just if you communicate, it's how often, and to whom. You adjust the type, the frequency, the level of detail in your reports. The key isn't communication volume, it's communication effectiveness.
Right, it's about efficiency.
Exactly. The goal of tailoring communication is to ensure the right information reaches the right person at the right time, without drowning people in data they don't need, or forcing the team to spend hours generating reports that nobody ever acts on.
Okay, risk management. This seems like it could go from a simple checklist to something incredibly complex.
And the level of tailoring must directly reflect the potential impact of failure. We tailor the level of analysis required. For a stable, well-understood project, you might just use a simplified qualitative risk list and a basic mitigation plan.
But for a truly innovative project with unproven tech, where the risks are mostly unknown,
For that leap of faith, tailoring dictates intensive, quantitative, adaptive risk management. You're doing probabilistic modeling, extensive contingency planning, and setting aside significant budget reserves. The tailored approach ensures the resources you spend on risk mitigation are proportional to the actual threat.
And finally, number 10, measurement and KPIs. This is about tailoring what success even looks like.
This is where that value focus really comes home. We choose what to measure based on the project's actual objectives. We focus explicitly on value indicators. Are we solving the core business problem? We move away from just adhering to fixed time or budget templates that were designed for some other type of project.
So the focus shifts from measuring effort, like number of bugs closed,
To measuring business impact. Things like reduce time to market or increase user retention. Real value.
Okay, that list covers pretty much every operational aspect of a project. With all this flexibility, all this room for adaptation, is there anything that is fixed? Does the PMBOK 8 still give us a solid, non-negotiable foundation?
Yes, and this is the critical safeguard that prevents this from becoming total chaos. The source material is very clear that while all the operational stuff can be tailored, the fundamental principles of project management are constant. They are fixed.
So they're non-negotiable universal truths.
Exactly. They apply whether you're building a website or a space shuttle.
Can you give us a few examples of these fixed principles?
Certainly. Examples would be always focusing on generating and maximizing value. That's a principle. Effectively and ethically engaging stakeholders. Demonstrating leadership. Applying holistic thinking, which means understanding the project as part of a broader system.
So you can't tailor away the need to manage stakeholders.
No, but you can tailor how you engage them. You can't tailor away the need to focus on value, but you can tailor how you measure it. The principles are the strategic guardrails, and those 10 elements we just discussed are the tactical tools you can adjust inside those guardrails. The principles are the bedrock.
This scope is massive. So if a project manager is sitting down, maybe on day one of a new project, and they need to start tailoring, what are the first biggest choices they have to make? We should probably focus on those truly foundational decisions, like picking the development approach and, fitting the project into the organizational machine.
Absolutely. Choosing the life cycle and development approach is, I would argue, the most important single decision in the entire tailoring process.
Because it dictates everything else.
It dictates the entire rhythm, the cadence, the governance model,
Right.
everything. It affects your planning depth, your risk management, your stakeholder involvement. If you get this choice wrong at the start, no amount of subsequent tailoring can really fix the friction it creates.
Okay, so let's start with the classic. Predictive or waterfall. We're building a house from a finished blueprint.
That's the perfect analogy. Predictive projects need defined, stable requirements from the very start. They rely on that clear sequential flow of phases. Analysis, then design, then execution. It's the preferred approach when change is limited, the product is very well understood, or the regulatory requirements are incredibly strict.
Like in construction or maybe some manufacturing.
Exactly. And the tailoring here involves adjusting the documentation levels and deciding on the right length and rigor of those phase gates. You're making sure you don't waste resources reviewing phases that are inherently low risk.
Okay, next one. Iterative. This is where we start to move away from that straight line.
Right. Iterative development means you're building the solution through successive cycles or repetitions. You don't try to build the final, perfect product immediately. You build version 1, then you refine it into version 2, and so on.
So it's about refining the same core idea over and over.
That's a good way to think about it. Imagine designing a sculpture. You start with a big block of marble, and you just keep refining that same piece until it's finished. It's used when your requirements are a bit incomplete, but the general direction is pretty stable. It allows for early feedback without going full agile. Tailoring here means defining the length and scope of each of those iteration cycles.
Okay, now, how does incremental differ from iterative? This is a point of confusion for a lot of people, myself included sometimes.
It's a crucial difference, and you're right, people mix them up all the time. Iterative is refining the whole product. Incremental is delivering completed parts of the product gradually.
Oh.
Think of baking a tiered wedding cake. You completely finish and deliver the first tier. It's done, it's a usable component. Then you do the second tier, then the third. Each one provides value early and is a complete piece on its own.
So incremental is best when you can deliver value early, and that's a high priority. Tailoring here would be about strategically prioritizing those releases to get the most valuable chunks out the door first.
Precisely. You're maximizing that early value delivery even if the whole thing isn't done yet.
And then we have adaptive or agile.
The adaptive approach is all about a high response to change. Short cycles, continuous collaboration. You use this when uncertainty is sky high, the final outcome isn't precisely known, and you fully expect requirements to change frequently.
Like in a startup or an R&D department.
Exactly. The big tailoring decision here is selecting the right framework. Are you using Scrum for complex, structured work, or maybe Kanban for a more continuous flow? And then you have to define crucial parameters, like the optimal sprint length for that particular team and that particular product.
Finally, we have the hybrid approach, which is probably the reality for most big organizations. You've got some stable parts of the system and some highly innovative parts. How do you tailor that merger?
The hybrid approach is all about combining predictive and adaptive elements. You use it when the level of clarity varies across different parts of the project. A classic example: designing the physical server racks for a new data center. That part is predictive. It requires formal procurement and planning.
But the cloud-native application that's going to run on those servers
is completely adaptive. And the strategic tailoring is figuring out how to merge the vastly different governance, scheduling, and communication styles of both of those worlds seamlessly. Often, this is done through an integrated program management office. The point is, this choice of lifecycle isn't procedural. It's a fundamental strategic decision tied directly to your business objectives.
Our sources make a really strong distinction between communication and engagement. They say communication alone is not enough for success. This feels almost philosophical, a point about true involvement.
It's more than philosophical, it's operational. Think of it this way. Communication is just the transfer of information. Sending a status report, distributing a memo, that's communication. But engagement, that's active, effective interaction. It's involvement in decision-making. It's about building genuine commitment and trust. PMBOK 8 really stresses that success comes from building trust through engagement, not just creating transparency through communication.
So if communication is just sending the report, what are the actual behaviors or artifacts that define active engagement?
Active engagement means you mandate that stakeholders, especially the business owners, have to participate. They're approving user stories, they're helping prioritize the backlog, they're sitting in on the review sessions where you're making tough scope trade-offs. It's creating mechanisms that demand participation, not just passive receipt of information.
So how do we tailor engagement?
We tailor it in 3 key areas. First, by identifying key stakeholders. Not everyone needs the same level of involvement, so we tailor their participation based on their influence, their interest, and how close they are to critical decisions. You have to figure out who needs to be in the room creating requirements versus who just needs to be kept informed.
Minimizing the noise for the core team.
Exactly. Second is tailoring the level of participation. This can vary wildly. It can range from just informing someone, which is very low engagement, all the way up to consulting them for feedback or making them a truly participative member of the decision-making team.
And the highest level would be empowering them.
Right. Empowering them with partial delegation, like granting a product owner full authority over the functional requirements. Choosing the right level is so important. If you over-involve low-impact stakeholders, you slow everything down. If you under-involve high-influence stakeholders, you are guaranteeing you'll get torpedoed later on.
And third is timing. When do you need that intense engagement, and when can you dial it back?
We have to define when that intensive engagement is needed. It's almost always highest in the very early stages: scope definition, requirements gathering, initial risk assessment. Then you might dial it back during the more routine execution phases once the direction is stable, and then bring those stakeholders back in for specific review gates or when you're delivering an increment.
And how does the choice between predictive and adaptive change the mechanics of all this?
Dramatically. In a predictive approach, engagement is very organized, it's scheduled, it's formally tied to big approvals and phase gates. Stakeholders are heavily involved at the very beginning to define the scope, and then at the end of major phases to approve the deliverables. It's generally low frequency, but high formality.
And in an adaptive world?
Participation has to be continuous and direct. Stakeholders, often through a dedicated product owner, are frequently integrated right into the team or at least located very close by. This enables that rapid, frequent feedback, sometimes daily. They contribute to ongoing decisions about scope and priority.
So it's high-frequency, low-formality engagement.
Exactly. And tailoring means setting up the right mechanisms, the daily stand-ups, the sprint reviews, the Kanban sessions, to facilitate that constant flow of interaction.
Okay, now we get to the practical roadmap. We know why we tailor, we know what we can tailor. How does a project manager actually do this? I think the most crucial philosophical point here is that this isn't a one-time decision on day one. It's a continuous process.
That's the most important point. Tailoring is reviewed and updated as the context changes. It's a dynamic cycle. It's your mechanism for continuous strategic correction. And the source material gives us 7 systematic steps for this.
Okay, let's walk through them. Step 1.
Step 1. Understand the context. This means you have to zoom all the way out and look at the entire ecosystem the project lives in.
That sounds huge. Where do you even start?
You start by analyzing the project environment. You have to understand the product itself, the organizational culture. Is it collaborative or bureaucratic? All the legal and regulatory factors. And most critically, the overarching business objectives. You have to answer the question, what is the highest value thing we are trying to achieve, and what are the biggest constraints we have to respect?
A project delivering a mandatory regulatory update is in a totally different context than one launching an experimental new product.
Completely different worlds, which leads to step 2. Define key project characteristics. Once the external context is clear, you quantify the project's own DNA.
You mean size? Complexity?
Size, budget, duration, resources, complexity, number of parts, dependencies, the level of uncertainty, how well defined are the requirements, and the team distribution is everyone in one room, or spread across 5 continents. This characterization tells you what level of control and communication complexity you're going to need. High uncertainty points you towards an adaptive approach. High size and complexity demands more rigorous planning.
And that leads to step 3, selective development approach and life cycle. This is that big strategic choice we talked about earlier, the foundation.
Correct. This choice predictive, iterative, adaptive, or hybrid is the foundation for every subsequent decision you make about processes and roles. If you make a mistake here, like committing to a predictive approach when requirements are still totally vague, that mistake will just ripple through everything else and cause endless frustration. This step requires real leadership and negotiation with your stakeholders.
Okay, so once that foundation is set, what's next?
Step 4. Define what to tailor. Now you get specific. Based on the previous steps, you specify which operational elements need adjustment. You decide which standard company processes you'll use in full, which ones you'll simplify, and which ones you'll just eliminate entirely. This is where you set the target depth for documentation, adjust the authority of certain roles, and define your engagement mechanisms. The goal is to use only what is necessary.
Then we get to the detail work. Step 5, customize methods and practices. This is moving from theory to implementation.
This is where you adjust the depth and formality of the processes you decided to keep. You change the number and frequency of meetings. Maybe weekly reviews become bi-weekly. Maybe you introduce daily stand-ups. You might establish quicker, lighter decision-making mechanisms if speed's critical. The focus has to always be on supporting the team and reducing drag, not complicating their work.
And then, step 6, implement the tailored approach.
Application is key, but so is getting buy-in. You have to apply the decisions you've made, but critically, you have to make sure the team understands why the approach was tailored this way. A team that gets the rationale behind choosing Kanban over Scrum or choosing light documentation is far more likely to stick to the approach and even self-police the process.
It prevents resistance.
It fosters a culture of adaptation, which brings us to the final step. Step 7, continuous review and improvement.
And this is what makes it a living cycle, not a static checklist.
Exactly. The environment changes, so the project must change with it. You continuously monitor your approach's effectiveness. Is our streamlined governance model causing us to miss key decisions? Is our minimal documentation leading to errors down the line? You have to be willing to adjust the tailoring when requirements change, when new risks pop up, or when stakeholder expectations shift. This step formalizes the practice of learning and making strategic course corrections.
There's one more piece here that seems critical: tailoring for the organization itself.
Yes. What really stands out here is the realization that you can't manage a project in a vacuum. It has to reflect the organization's identity, its capabilities, and its constraints. You have to align the project process with the organizational ecosystem.
Because if you don't, the project is just constantly fighting upstream against the way the organization naturally works.
Precisely. You have to use these organizational factors as mandatory inputs for your tailoring.
Like culture. How much formality is expected? Is leadership top-down or participative? That drives the whole feel of the project.
It does. You have to understand the degree of formality, the organization's tolerance for risk and change, and the prevalent leadership style. If the culture is highly risk-averse, your tailoring has to incorporate more formal documentation and stage gates. Even if the project itself is simple, you have to respect the organizational values, or your process will just be quietly sabotaged by low compliance and apathy.
Then there's the organizational structure.
Right. The structure, whether it's functional, where resources report to their department managers, matrix with shared resources, or project-oriented, where the PM has high authority, that profoundly affects the PM's actual power and decision speed. If you're in a heavily functional structure where the PM has very little authority, your tailoring has to focus on adjusting coordination mechanisms and communication channels to compensate for that lack of direct control.
And governance. Flexibility doesn't mean you can just ignore the company's rules of the road.
Correct. You still have to report up to the executive level. Your tailoring must comply with the established approval policies, stage gates, and formal reporting requirements that the organization has set. The project might be using an agile approach internally, but its overall governance still has to align with the organization's framework for things like financial reporting and risk management. You're simplifying the project's internal bureaucracy while respecting the external organizational bureaucracy.
And maturity level seems important too.
It sets the ceiling for how complex your tailored approach can be. A highly mature organization, one with an established PMO and skilled teams, can handle complex hybrid frameworks. But a less mature organization needs simpler, clearer, often more prescriptive processes because the team just doesn't have the institutional experience to manage high ambiguity effectively. You have to scale the tailoring to the team's current capabilities.
Finally, compliance. This is the absolute constraint, right? If the law says you have to do something, you just have to do it.
That's the hard boundary. Tailoring must always adhere to legal requirements, internal policies, and industry regulations. Flexibility does not mean ignoring compliance. If a formal sign-off is required by law at a specific milestone, like an environmental impact assessment, you can tailor everything around that requirement, like the meeting frequency or the report format, but the compliance requirement itself is non-negotiable.
Wow. This has been a monumental deep dive into what feels like the core mandate of PMBOK 8. We started by establishing that tailoring isn't just a suggestion, it's a strategic imperative. It's driven by this absolute necessity to achieve real business value, to cut administrative complexity, and to respond dynamically to uncertainty.
We then systematically went through the 10 core elements of what we can customize. It covers everything from how deeply we focus on the performance domains and which processes we just get rid of, to how we define our success metrics and structure governance. The successful project manager today is, by definition, a designer of tailored systems, not just a rigid follower of procedures.
And finally, we broke down that 7-step process, emphasizing that those huge decisions, like picking the development approach and fitting the project perfectly into the organization, they happen early, but they also have to be continuously reviewed to make sure the system stays proportional and effective.
The big takeaway from PMBOK 8 is that project success isn't achieved through literal, rigid adherence to a template. It's achieved through the skillful choice of what suits the project at the right time. The successful PM is a context-aware leader, capable of designing a unique management system for every single challenge. They're defined as much by what they choose to exclude as by what they choose to include.
So let's leave you with this final provocative thought, and let's tie it back to that most critical concept: value optimization. Think about the idea of value indicators. Which metric in your current project or even in your personal workflow report is merely measuring effort, things like hours spent or forms filled out, and which metric is truly measuring impact, the actual realization of value? Go find the report or the process you can eliminate this week because it only measures effort, not value.
Simplify to maximize.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So you sent us some really powerful excerpts, all pointing to this foundational philosophy of modern project management. We're talking, of course, about what's emerging from the PMBOK Guide, 8th edition. And we have torn through these pages. We are definitely ready to unpack what feel like some of the most revolutionary concepts to come out in a long time.
That's a big shift, a really big shift.
It really is. So our mission today is, well, it's laser-focused. We are going to try and decode this massive philosophical change at the heart of the new guidance. We're moving from a world that was defined by rigid, prescriptive steps.
The old rule books.
Exactly, the old rule books. And we're moving to one that's centered entirely on tailoring or takyuf, which is this deliberate customization of how we manage work. We're really here to give you the shortcut to understanding what this change means, for your organization and for your career.
And this is so much more than just an update. I mean, it's really a redefinition of what project success even is.
Right.
The sources, they make it crystal clear that success is no longer judged by, say, the accuracy of your documentation or the sheer volume of compliance checks you perform.
The old check-the-box mentality.
That's gone. Success is now fundamentally driven by context, flexibility, and the realization of quantifiable value. It really turns the project manager into more of a sophisticated strategist rather than just a process administrator.
And I think for anyone listening to this from a strategic or organizational level, there's a vital top-line takeaway right at the start. The new philosophy insists that tailoring at the organizational level is absolutely not an optional activity. You can't just delegate it away. It's a fundamental foundational necessity.
That's a great point. Organizations now have to actively define which internal regulations are actually critical, which ones can be merged or simplified, and frankly, which ones should be eliminated entirely to maximize the overall business agility.
That's a huge undertaking.
It is. But think about the contradiction the modern project manager is facing. They have to be deeply aware of the organizational structure, the legal governance, all of that. But at the same time, they need to be incredibly flexible in how they apply methodology.
And all while being committed to ethical practice and focusing on a measurable outcome.
Exactly. This entire deep dive is really about that sophisticated balancing act required to make all of that work in the real world.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If that's the high-level mandate from the organization, what does project tailoring actually look like when the rubber meets the road? On a real project, what are we customizing?
So project tailoring is the customization of your project management practices, your methods, and your tools to precisely match the individual characteristics of that specific project.
So it's the official nail in the coffin for the one-size-fits-all approach.
It absolutely is. It's the official recognition that the historical standards is inefficient. It often leads to this kind of bureaucratic overkill, and in many cases, it actively inhibits value creation. It gets in the way.
So the aha moment here, the big insight, is that the 8th edition officially confirms the project itself. Its unique DNA, its goals, its environment, that's the starting point for all tailoring decisions. We have to work from the project outwards, not from the rulebook inward.
Precisely. You and I both know that every project is a unique, temporary endeavor. I mean, you could have two projects within the same department using the same people, and they could have wildly different risk profiles or stakeholder maps.
Right.
And the new guidance, it explicitly warns that applying excessive process overkill things like mandatory weekly progress reports for a tiny project, 5 levels of sign-off, that can just drown small, simple projects in administrative inefficiency. And that's pure waste.
And I guess the flip side is true, too. If you oversimplify the methodology for a highly complex, multi-million-dollar integration project, you're basically setting that project up for catastrophic failure by skipping necessary control points.
You're flying blind. The goal is really clear. Increase overall efficiency, dramatically improve the speed and the quality of your decision-making, and, maybe most importantly, focus the entire team's energy on delivering actual value.
Instead of just achieving formal document-based compliance.
Exactly. You're optimizing the management effort itself. You have to start treating it as a resource, one to be invested wisely, not just spent.
Okay, so to get that optimization, the sources identify 7 key factors. These are the things that have to drive every single tailoring decision you make. This feels like the PM's new checklist for designing their methodology.
It really is. And we need to go through each one because they fundamentally influence whether you're going to choose a predictive approach, an agile one, a hybrid, or something completely custom. #tag the 7 key factors driving project tailoring decisions.
All right, let's start with the most obvious one, but probably the one that's most frequently mishandled. Project size. How does pure scale dictate the need for different administrative tailoring?
Well, size is a crucial determinant of what we could call the process weight.
Process weight. I like that.
For small projects, let's say a quick internal process automation, you need lighter processes. You need simplified documentation and smaller, often cross-functional teams. Tailoring here involves ruthlessly stripping away every single administrative layer that doesn't directly contribute to that outcome.
So no formal steering committee for a 2-week effort.
Please, no. The focus is rapid speed and minimal friction. You're trying to get out of the team's way, not put hurdles in front of them.
And what's the counterexample? What about the big ones?
For large projects, like the launch of a new regulatory compliance system that's going to impact thousands of users, that immediately demands clearer, more structured governance. There's no way around it.
Okay.
They require the work to be logically divided, often into distinct phases, sub-projects, or even full programs. And they also necessitate far more detailed planning and more sophisticated control tools. Things like formal earned value management become necessary simply because the investment is so high.
And the margin for error is low.
It's tiny. And complexity, you have to remember, complexity increases geometrically with scale. So the tailoring decision here really defines the depth and the formality of the tools you're going to use.
That brings us perfectly to the second factor, the degree of complexity. As you said, this is about entanglement, not just size. We could be talking about technical complexity, like integrating legacy systems.
Or organizational complexity, trying to manage 5 different business units with competing priorities. Or even stakeholder complexity.
Right, so what's the rule here?
The guidance is firm on this. Higher complexity demands more adaptive planning. If your project involves high technical interdependence, you just cannot rely on a linear Gantt chart that you developed 6 months ago. It's useless.
It's obsolete the day after you print it.
Pretty much. So tailoring in this case necessitates a heightened focus on coordination mechanisms, on rigorous interface management, and on specific integration efforts. This might mean you need a daily stand-up meeting that's focused solely on integration risks. That's something a simple project would never need.
But isn't there a risk here? Doesn't high complexity usually lead to more bureaucracy, not less? How does tailoring help prevent that?
That's the critical pivot. That's the mindset shift. We are tailoring the approach to manage complexity. We're not just layering on more paperwork to describe it.
Ah, okay.
So tailoring involves consciously choosing the appropriate approach. Often it's a flexible or hybrid model. And then significantly strengthening your capacity in the domains where that complexity lives, like risk management and communication.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Instead of producing a 100-page coordination document that no one will read, we might tailor by instituting a single high-frequency but low-formality coordination meeting. And you embed decision rights directly into that meeting.
So you're replacing static documentation with dynamic interaction.
Exactly. You're solving the problem, not documenting it.
Okay, moving to the third factor. The level of uncertainty and ambiguity. I find this distinction really, really useful. Uncertainty is often about the known unknowns, right? But ambiguity is about the unknowns we haven't even defined yet. It's the fuzziness of the end goal itself.
And that distinction is absolutely key for tailoring. If you're dealing with high ambiguity, maybe a new product development project where you're exploring an unproven market, you cannot commit to a 3-year plan. It's fantasy.
Right.
You need an iterative or a flexible approach. Your tailoring has to prioritize short-term decisions and frequent testing. You're focusing on learning, not on definitive long-term planning. This is what prevents those massive investments that are based on poor early data.
And the classic predictive model, the waterfall approach, it still has its place, right? It's not dead.
Oh, absolutely not. If you have low ambiguity, for instance, you're migrating a stable, well-understood database system, and your requirements are stable, a predictive approach is still perfectly viable. In fact, it's highly efficient.
So tailoring here is about choosing not to be agile.
Yes. Tailoring here ensures you stick to that predictive model and you don't introduce the unnecessary churn that's associated with agile methods. That would just be waste in a stable environment. So you're selecting the approach that best minimizes waste against the level of certainty you actually possess.
That analytical approach leads us directly into the fourth factor, the risk profile. This is where we're assessing the number of risks, the severity of their potential impact, and the probability of them happening.
For high-risk projects, and here you should think about major safety initiatives or projects in unstable geopolitical jurisdictions, tailoring is all about building robust defenses.
Okay.
These projects demand advanced risk planning that goes way beyond a simple risk register. They require periodic risk review meetings that are mandatory and frequent. And critically, they require larger contingency and management reserves built into the budget from day one.
So what's the practical tailoring adjustment here? What does the PM actually do differently?
The adaptation involves increasing the number of control points, your checkpoints, and the formal reviews throughout the project lifecycle. You have to integrate risk management activities into every single phase. You can't treat it as a periodic check-in.
It's not a side task.
It's a core activity. And if the risk profile is extreme, you might tailor the methodology to require specialized technical experts to approve every single major design decision. You're adding necessary weight to the process to buy down that risk. For a low-risk project, though, the risk log might just be a simple shared document you review once a week.
Okay, that makes sense. Factor 5, strategic importance. This seems to relate directly to how much organizational attention and governance oversight is required.
It's all about focus. If a project is of high strategic importance, say, it's the project that's going to enable 80% of next year's corporate revenue. It demands strengthened governance structures.
The C-suite is watching
Closely. Tailoring mandates formalized involvement from senior management, probably a high-level steering committee, and the reporting has to be detailed, rigorous, and frequent. Conversely, an operational support project that can and should be managed with simpler local procedures and far fewer layers of sign-off.
The major benefit here seems to be saving the C-suite from administrative overload, from getting dragged into the weeds on everything.
Precisely. You're saving their most valuable resource, their time and attention. Tailoring ensures that management effort is deliberately directed where the potential value return or the strategic threat is highest. Why would the CEO need to sign off on minor budget changes for an internal IT upgrade when their time is best spent reviewing the market strategy for the flagship product?
It just makes sense. You distribute oversight according to value.
Exactly.
All right, the 6th factor. This one acknowledges the messy human element. Stakeholder characteristics. We're looking at the sheer number of stakeholders, the diversity of their interests, their political influence, all of it.
This is where empathy and, frankly, political savvy have to merge with process. For politically or socially sensitive projects, where stakeholders have diverse and often conflicting interests, environmental groups, local government, regulatory bodies, all in one project, tailoring means you have to significantly increase interaction.
It's not just a weekly email update.
No way. You're adjusting communication styles based on a really granular influence map. The communication plan for a project like that becomes a highly customized strategic document.
And what about simple internal projects?
Well, if you have fewer stakeholders and their interests are largely aligned, let's say an internal systems update for just one department, your communication strategy can be much, much simpler. You might rely on automated updates, simplified status dashboards. Tailoring makes communication a highly targeted value-add activity. You're ensuring the right people get the right information in the right format without overwhelming everyone else with noise.
Okay, finally, we address the 7th factor, constraints. The classic triad of time, cost, and scope, but expanded now to include things like regulatory or resource constraints.
Constraints are really the boundaries that define what is manageable, what's possible. If you face an extremely tight time constraint, for instance, tailoring helps you prioritize decisions that reduce pressure on that schedule.
How so?
Well, it might mean you consciously decide to accept a slightly higher risk in one area, or you dramatically simplify documentation in favor of speed. If your main constraint is a specific, scarce resource, like a single expert, then tailoring dictates practices that optimize that person's utilization, maybe requiring high-detail resource leveling in your plan.
So the key benefit here is that tailoring forces the project manager to select practices that specifically address and mitigate the pressure of the most critical constraint in that particular project environment.
Yes, you're designing a methodology that respects the boundaries of reality.
So, after this deep dive into these 7 factors, the takeaway for me is clear. The modern project manager is no longer defined by their ability to fill out templates.
Not at all.
They are first and foremost a context analyst, someone who diagnoses the project environment and then custom designs the management approach to fit it perfectly. Okay, so that analysis, that gives us our initial tailoring plan. We've designed our approach. But here's where it gets really, really interesting, Fanny. Our sources stress that once we've tailored it, we don't just lock it down and forget about it.
Right.
The new philosophy explicitly links that initial tailoring to the necessity of continuous improvement, or CI. This makes the methodology a living, breathing thing.
And that just captures the dynamic reality of modern work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The core concept here is that those tailoring decisions are not static. They're not made once. They have to be reviewed, they have to be tested, and they have to be updated periodically throughout the entire project lifecycle.
But why? I mean, doesn't that risk process instability? If we planned correctly based on those 7 initial factors, why introduce the possibility of constant revision?
Because your initial assumptions are guaranteed to decay. It's a certainty.
Okay.
Requirements invariably shift. New risks emerge, or old ones escalate unexpectedly. External market conditions change. And, most critically, the team gains new experience and knowledge as they execute the work.
So the process map we set up on day 1, even if it was perfect then, might be causing problems by month 3.
It could be causing crippling friction or unnecessary delays. Continuous improvement ensures that the project management approach itself remains appropriate and relevant in real time. It's about actively reducing administrative waste and maximizing the value you realize by correcting the course as you go.
So it's about focusing on value and outcomes rather than just rigidly adhering to a plan that may have become obsolete?
That's the heart of it.
This sounds like a profound cultural shift, though. It goes beyond just administration. It requires adopting a culture of learning and adaptation within the team itself. You have to support the principle of inspect and adapt instead of the old rigid mandate of plan and follow blindly, no matter what the results are.
It is entirely a mindset transformation. The guiding framework has to encourage self-correction, candor, and shared learning. And it's so crucial to remember that CI is applied universally. This isn't just an agile concept.
Right, it's not just for software.
Not at all. You apply it vigorously in all approaches, predictive, flexible, and hybrid, because every single project type benefits from optimization and waste reduction during its execution phase.
So when should a team formally apply this continuous improvement loop? Are there specific triggers or events?
The sources suggest applying CI at all the logical transition points. This would include formal reviews after major phases or during scheduled performance deep dives. It also includes the time immediately following the delivery of a partial accepted deliverable.
That makes sense. You learn from what you just delivered.
Exactly. And perhaps most urgently, you apply it upon the appearance of recurring, avoidable problems. If your team is complaining about the same piece of paperwork or the same meeting structure for 3 weeks straight, that's not a human error problem. That's a process tailoring problem that needs immediate attention.
Okay, let's break down the 5 key areas where continuous improvement specifically targets these tailoring decisions. This is where we can learn how to eliminate that zombie paperwork you mentioned earlier.
Right. First, we evaluate processes and procedures. This means the team and management have to audit everything. Are our current procedures causing bottlenecks? Are they creating administrative burden without adding any real value?
And the improvement is tangible.
Very. It's simplifying mandatory procedures, it's merging redundant steps, or it's eliminating activities entirely if they do not add value to the outcome. It's a constant administrative cleanup. Sometimes it might mean eliminating an entire reporting cycle that nobody cares about.
The second area focuses on tools and techniques. This is a place where we can waste a tremendous amount of money and time on needless complexity.
Oh, absolutely. CI requires rigorously reviewing the effectiveness and, importantly, the adoption rate of all your planning, monitoring, and communication tools.
So if no one's using it, it's not effective.
It's waste. If a complex tool demands excessive training or it's generating mountains of data that nobody acts upon, tailoring means you replace it. Maybe you replace it with something simpler, like a shared whiteboard, instead of a sophisticated project management system. Or you adopt more efficient, integrated digital solutions. The goal is utility, not complexity or feature accumulation.
Okay, area number 3 is the governance and control style. This deals with reducing the reporting overhead that serves historical mandates rather than current needs.
Here, we assess the total number of mandated reports, the frequency of mandatory meetings, and the specific decision points involved in the process. Improvement means ruthlessly reducing those unnecessary reports.
The filed but never read documents.
Exactly. It also means readjusting control points to be more strategic and modifying the levels of escalation if decision-making is proving to be too slow. Tailoring makes governance leaner and faster. It respects the high cost of senior leadership's time.
Fourth is stakeholder management. This area seems like it's constantly in flux, especially on those high-visibility projects.
It is. So a continuous review of your communication effectiveness and, critically, measuring stakeholder satisfaction levels are vital. Improvement here might involve drastically changing the style of communication.
How so?
You might move from highly formal, written memos to quick, collaborative digital channels. Or it could mean dynamically adjusting the frequency of interaction, reducing updates for low-impact stakeholders, and increasing communication almost to a daily level with high-influence groups during critical periods.
And finally, the fifth area, team performance. This is looking at the internal efficiency and clarity of purpose within the team.
Right. The analysis here focuses on key performance metrics relating to productivity, clarity of roles, is there overlap or ambiguity, and the quality of collaboration.
And what would an improvement look like?
An improvement in tailoring might involve adjusting the division of labor. It could mean redistributing responsibilities to better align with the skills people have demonstrated on the project, or enhancing specialized training to improve the collective capability in a new process or tool that you've just implemented.
The project manager's role here sounds less like a policeman enforcing the rules and more like a chief process optimizer.
That's exactly the shift. The manager has to foster an environment that encourages learning, candor, and improvement without blame.
That's a huge point.
It's critical. If the team fears reprisal for pointing out inefficient processes, CI fails instantly. It's dead on arrival. The manager has to monitor the effectiveness of previous tailoring decisions and, crucially, document why the changes were made. The documentation itself shifts from proving what you planned to proving the logic behind your adaptation and knowledge transfer.
Okay, so we've handled the big picture, the initial tailor, and the change mechanism, which is continuous improvement. Now let's drill down into the specifics of execution. How do we apply this new mindset to the actual areas of work? And that's where these performance domains, these integrated focus areas, come in.
Right, and you should think of the performance domains as outlining what must be achieved to deliver a successful outcome, regardless of the methodology you chose.
So they're functional frameworks.
Exactly. Stakeholder management, planning, team, delivery, and so on. They detail the outcomes you need, not a rigid set of instructions on how to execute them literally.
Which, of course, means that tailoring the domains is essential. It's about determining the appropriate application intensity of each domain based on the project's unique nature, its environment, its complexity, and the development approach we've selected.
Correct. The goal is to select only those practices within each domain that are going to achieve the best actual value for the specific project. We are tailoring the intensity and the focus of our effort across all the domains to maintain balance and avoid draining resources on low-priority areas. #tag domain examples of tailoring, highlighting contrasts.
Okay, let's make this real. Let's start with the stakeholders' performance domain. The amount of effort you put here is obviously going to be highly sensitive to context.
Hugely. Take a high-sensitivity project, something like a massive public infrastructure build or a major regulatory overhaul. Tailoring here requires an extremely high, continuous focus. We're talking deep stakeholder analysis, intensive personalized interaction, maybe even creating a dedicated public engagement team.
And the contrast.
Contrast that with a simple internal project with just a handful of stakeholders. In that case, your communication and expectation management can be largely simplified. You can automate it through dashboards and focus only on essential milestone updates. You might spend 80% less effort on this domain because the context allows for it.
Okay, next. Optimizing the team performance domain. This is all about getting the best out of the people that we have.
Right. So if you have a small, highly experienced team that has a history of successful collaboration, your tailoring should lean heavily toward self-empowerment, shared responsibility, and reduced managerial supervision.
You trust them to get it done.
You trust them. Trust and proven competence allow for maximum autonomy. Conversely, if you have a large, newly formed, or multicultural team, you have to increase the formality of your coordination mechanisms. You have to enhance role clarity through detailed definitions and possibly introduce formal knowledge-sharing protocols. You're tailoring the management structure to match the team's maturity level.
The development approach and lifecycle domain, this seems like the big one. This dictates the path we take, the core methodology decision.
It is a big one. If you're working with stable requirements, tailoring confirms that a predictive, phased approach with detailed upfront planning is the right call. But if the project involves changing requirements or R&D elements, tailoring mandates a flexible, iterative, or hybrid approach.
And it's more than just picking agile or waterfall.
Much more. Beyond that core methodology, tailoring here defines the specifics. The exact number of phases, where your mandatory gonna-go review points will sit, and the specific style and pace of your incremental delivery.
Okay, then we move to the planning performance domain. How do we maintain structure here without falling back into that old trap of over-planning everything to death?
For high-complexity projects, those with tons of dependencies, you still need detailed planning. You can't escape it, but it has to be graduated. This is where rolling wave planning is explicitly endorsed.
Can you break that down?
It means you plan the immediate horizon, say the next 3 months, in high granular detail. But you plan the far future, like the next year, only at a high-level thematic scale. For short-term projects, with a simple scope, light, flexible planning is all you need.
So the focus is on utility.
The key focus is concentration. Only plan what genuinely serves decision-making. If you are planning deliverables that won't be executed for 2 years and are almost certain to change, that planning effort today is 100% waste.
Right. Now, what about the delivery performance domain? This is all about how we release value and confirm that it's been accepted.
Right. So if the project is aimed at a single final delivery, like a complex compliance report or a physical building, the tailoring dictates that your quality focus is concentrated on rigorous final testing and comprehensive final acceptance criteria. All the weight is at the end.
But if you have phased deliverables, like in software development,
Then tailoring mandates continuous reviews, rapid acceptance cycles after each and every increment, and iterative improvements based on that early feedback. Tailoring here determines the speed, the frequency, and the formality of the customer acceptance process itself.
the measurement performance domain must be carefully tailored too. The instruction seems clear. Measure what matters for value, not just what's easy to count.
That's it exactly. For high-risk or high strategic importance projects, tailoring necessitates more performance indicators, your KPIs, and meticulous frequent monitoring. You need highly detailed visibility into scope, schedule, and resources.
And for low-risk projects.
For low-risk projects, you can use simplified aggregated measurement. Maybe you're just tracking key milestones and the overall budget variance. The overriding goal always is that measurement must directly support actionable decision-making. If your metrics don't inform a potential course correction, they are bureaucratic waste. Full stop.
You also mentioned another domain, the uncertainty performance domain, which pulls together risk, ambiguity, and opportunity. That's fascinating. How does tailoring apply to hunting for opportunity, not just managing threats?
It's a critical new focus. If you are managing a highly innovative project with high technological or market uncertainty, your tailoring needs a massive proactive focus on both risk and opportunity management.
What would that look like in practice?
You might use advanced techniques like Monte Carlo simulation, but tailored for quick analysis to assess the potential market gains if you accelerate a certain feature. You're actively modeling the upside. For stable, repetitive projects, traditional risk management focused primarily on mitigation is probably sufficient. So tailoring here defines your organization's appetite for opportunity and the speed of your response mechanisms to capture it.
So the guiding principle here is really integration. You can't just simplify planning without compensating somewhere else, maybe by increasing measurement frequency or enhancing team communication.
That is the core management challenge. Tailoring is a strategic decision that demands integration and balance. The domains are integrated frameworks. Tailoring converts them into effective practical tools by ensuring that simplifying one domain is offset by strengthening another area to maintain overall project control and ultimately value realization.
This is the section that, frankly, it shocked me when I was reading the sources. It represents the biggest administrative shakeup in PM standards philosophy in decades.
That's huge.
The old way, the heavy bureaucratic way, it relied on these rigid lists of inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. The infamous ITTOs. They often dictated document production just for its own sake. The new philosophy explicitly rejects that prescriptive bureaucracy.
And that conceptual shift is foundational. For project managers everywhere, this should feel like an act of liberation. The focus has entirely moved from what must be produced formally to what supports actionable decision-making and value realization.
We're shifting from a documentation-first compliance culture
To a thinking-first value culture.
I mean, rejecting ITTOs entirely is a radical act of administrative liberation. That must save project managers hundreds of hours a year on required document production alone.
Without a single doubt. Just think of the hours you've spent justifying documentation that provided zero value beyond satisfying some historical mandate. The sources recognize that time is much better spent analyzing context and making good decisions. Hashtag inputs and outputs. Source 4. In all the previous editions, inputs and outputs were fixed elements. They were tied rigidly to specific processes. They were mandatory steps that generated mandatory documents. Now, the sources declare, Inputs and outputs are flexible.
So what are they now?
They are simply supporting elements. They could be information, resources, decisions, or documents that support the achievement of outcomes within the performance domains. They are not restricted by rigid lists, and they are absolutely not mandatory if they do not add value.
That gives the project manager extraordinary power to tailor the information flow on their project. So how exactly does one go about tailoring I&Os in this new world?
You have to apply the value test rigorously to everything. Not every project needs the same quantity of documents. Not every project needs the same level of detail in those documents. Tailoring determines what to produce. For example, a formal requirements traceability matrix or just a simplified scope document.
And when to produce it and how detailed it needs to be.
Exactly. When it is necessary and at what level of detail the information must be captured. If producing a detailed stakeholder register takes 40 hours and provides only a marginal benefit over a simple list, the register is tailored away. You don't do it.
Wow.
So this new philosophy, it means I&Os are now characterized as non-fixed, highly adaptable based on the project's complexity. They're interconnected. An output from the stakeholder domain, like an engagement strategy, becomes an input for the communication domain. And they're dynamic. They change as the project progresses and you enter new phases.
But I have to ask, wasn't the rigor of the ITTOs designed to ensure nothing was missed, especially on massive, complex projects?
They were intended to ensure completeness, yes. But in practice, they often led to blind application. The move away from that rigidity was necessary to avoid bureaucracy, to encourage critical thinking, and to prevent purely formal compliance, where documents are created solely for the audit trail, but offer no real insight to the team doing the work.
So the project manager is now forced to justify the creation of every single piece of documentation.
Yes. The I&Os are no longer the goal. They are simply a means to support high-performance decision-making. #tag tools and techniques, source 5.
Similarly, the tools and techniques, the T&Ts, they've been redefined. They're no longer mandatory steps or prescriptive methodologies that are tied to a specific process.
Exactly. T&Ts are now defined as optional means. They are models, analyses, or practices that are used to support thinking, decision-making, and performance improvement within the domains. They are explicitly not mandatory or tied to fixed processes.
So the assessment is no longer about checking if you used a particular tool like a Gantt chart.
It's about, did the tool you chose help you succeed? That's the only question that matters.
And just like the I&Os, T&Ts are highly adaptable based on project size, complexity, team maturity, and risk level.
Yes, they have to be selected consciously. They are non-obligatory, and most importantly, they are value-driven. They should only be used if they provide a genuine, conscious benefit to the project's performance.
This actively discourages that practice of tool accumulation.
Oh, yes, where managers adopt complex, high-overhead systems just because they exist or because they look good on a report, regardless of whether the project actually needs that level of detail.
So let's give our listeners some specific examples of how these tools are now classified in this flexible sense, rather than being steps in a recipe.
We can classify them broadly based on their function. First, we have analysis and decision-making tools. These include specific techniques like root cause analysis to diagnose failures, detailed scenario analysis to model potential futures, and cost-benefit analysis. They're used to genuinely support an executive decision, not just to produce mandatory, unactionable reports.
And for planning.
Second, you have planning and organization tools. This includes the classic work breakdown structure, or WBS. It includes strategic roadmaps, or the rolling wave planning we just talked about. These are selected based on the need for structure versus the need for responsiveness. A high-flexibility project might choose a Kanban board over a 500-line WDS.
That makes sense.
And third, you have your measurement and monitoring tools. This includes key performance indicators, KPIs, earned value management, EVM, which is highly complex, and so it's only appropriate for larger projects with a stable scope and simplified dashboards. Again, these are chosen only if they effectively inform the people who need to decide on a course correction.
The project manager's role regarding tools has really transitioned from just following instructions to a high-level strategic selection process. That requires some serious technical knowledge.
It does. The manager must consciously select tools based on fit. They have to ensure the team is properly trained, they have to continuously review their effectiveness during the CI phase, and they have to be willing to replace or simplify inefficient tools without remorse.
It's about being ruthless with what isn't working.
It is. And the final word in PMBOK on this is, I think, really profound. A good tool is one that is used effectively and adds benefit, not one that is simply documented in the project charter. The professional manager selects tools intelligently, preventing bureaucratic overhead and tool-induced complexity. Hashtag outro.
We have covered a massive philosophical and administrative terrain today. Recapping the major shifts here, the heart of modern project management is ruthless customization. We've moved from following a rigid, predefined script, the comfort of the old ITDOs, to intelligently designing a project methodology that's built precisely for the project's unique purpose and context.
And that transformation is powered by the need to continuously adapt. The initial tailoring, based on those 7 key factors, it has to become a living process, one that's driven by continuous improvement. Project success relies entirely on understanding its unique characteristics and continuously optimizing its management approach based on the realized value, not on the planned adherence.
The project manager is fundamentally redefined. They are no longer a process administrator who is just focused on paperwork. They are a sophisticated context analyzer and an adaptive decision maker who is focused on maximizing value and eliminating waste.
Thank you for diving deep with us into what really is the future of project management philosophy.
And as you reflect on this necessary shift toward organizational flexibility, remember the core dilemma that's inherent in the sources we reviewed. Organizational tailoring forbids neglecting necessary legal or regulatory requirements, but at the same time, it demands flexibility to reduce waste. This leads us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. How do successful organizations measure the real difference between critical regulatory adherence, the non-negotiable compliance, and unnecessary bureaucratic burdens that are imposed by internal policy that merely add cost and friction? That precise differentiation is the next frontier of organizational value realization and agility.